We are now live. Presenter's laptop sound check. Clerk's laptop sound check.
Good afternoon, committee colleagues, staff, guests, delegates, and the viewing public. I'd like to call this Emergency Community Services Committee meeting of December 9th to order. Members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the media may also be audibly or visually recording this meeting. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings, and members are reminded of the 5-minute time limit, which we will be adhering to in this meeting. And members can always submit another request to speak if they require more time to ask questions or make your comments. We do have quorum present. Do note that Councillor Pauls and Councillor Whitehead have given their regrets for today's meeting. So first item of business for us is the appointment of a chair and vice chair for 2022. May I please have some nominations for the chair of 2022?
Madam Chair?
Yes, please.
Who's presently the vice chair?
Currently, it's Councillor Jackson, who's been pinch hitting in 2021.
Great. So I'll move Councillor Jackson as chair.
Councillor Marula, thank you so much, but I decline respectfully. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Councillor Clark, would you be interested?
I can help out, Sam. No problem. I'm
So
sorry, Councillor. No problem.
I'll move Councillor Clark.
Seconded.
Excellent. So we have a motion to nominate Councillor Clark as chair for 2022, and it's seconded. We'll require a electronic vote, please. Councillor Jackson seconded. Councillor Marula moved.
Madam Chair, on the vice chair, would Councillor Jackson be interested?
Just hang on one quick second, Councillor Marula.
Sorry.
We just need to clear the vote, and it's carried. Now go ahead, please.
Sorry. The vice chair, I'll move Councillor Jackson if he's interested in the vice chair's position.
The challenge with that, Councillor Jackson, or Councillor Marula, is that Councillor Jackson is currently serving as vice chair. So according to our records, the only committee members who are present who have not served as vice chair in this term of council is yourself.
Okay, well, I'll do it then, if you need me to.
I will move Councillor Sam Marula, Chair Nan.
Thank you. Seconded by myself. So it's duly moved to have Councillor Marula serve as vice chair for 2022. Electronic vote, please.
Councillor Marula, I appreciate twice your vote of confidence in me. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And that carries as well. Congratulations to you both, and thank you for stepping up. Moving on to item number 2, approval of the agenda. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda today?
Yes, Madam Chair, we have a number of changes to the agenda. We have item 4, minutes to the previous meeting. Item 4.2, the minutes of November 18th have been added. These minutes were the minutes on the agenda were identified in the agenda as November 18th, but the attached item was actually the minutes from November 4th. And we need to approve both at this meeting because we lost quorum and they were not approved. The November 4th minutes were not approved at the last meeting. So the November 8th, the agenda has been adjusted, and the November 18th and November 4th minutes are there on the agenda, correctly identified. So the November 18th minutes have been added. We also have new communication items. That's item 5. Item 5.6 is correspondence from Michelle Cho respecting Cathedral Shelter. The recommendation is that it be received and referred to item 8.2. Item 5.7, correspondence from Damon Ju respecting Cathedral Shelter. Also, the recommendation is also to be received and referred to item 8.2. We have correspondence 5.8 from Carmen Orlandis respecting the Cathedral Shelter, which will be, the recommendation is that it be received and referred to item 8.2. Olivia O'Connor is item 5.9 from Hamilton Acorn respecting Renovations. The recommendation there is that it be received and referred to item 8.2. And item 5.10 from Regina Henry respecting couples shelter, and the recommendation is that it be received and referred to item 8.2. We also have several new delegation requests. Item 6.2 from Douglas Sporbeck from Hamilton Acorn, respecting Renovations for today's meeting, and that is a video delegation. We have Elizabeth Ellis, also from Hamilton Acorn, respecting Renovations for today's meeting. That's also a video delegation. And then we have Darlene Wesley from Hamilton Acorn, respecting Renovations for today's meeting. Zechariah Hawkridge, item 6.5 from Acorn Hamilton, respecting Renovations for today's meeting. Item 6.6, Christine Jewers from Acorn, respecting Renovations for today's meeting. Item 6.7, Marnie McElveen, respecting couple shelter for today's meeting. We have two new discussion items under item 10. Item 10.10, the 2022 budget submission from the Seniors Advisory Committee, report HSC 21050 citywide. And item 10.11, the 2021 Ministry of Long-Term Care Funding Enhancement, report HSC 21052, respecting wards 6 and 13. And then we have an added notice of motion, item 12, it's item 12.1, comprehensive human rights-based health-focused housing solutions for residents living encamped across Hamilton.
Thank you so much, Elsie Bates. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the agenda as amended? Moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor Clark. Any discussion on the agenda? Seeing none, we'll move to an electronic vote. Councillor Jackson's thumb is up. And that carries. Thank you. Moving to item number 3, it is declarations of interest. Colleagues, any declarations of interest to declare?
Yes,
Seeing
Madam
none?
Chair.
Oh, go ahead.
As a result of myself and my wife being landlords, I need to declare an interest in order to prevent a conflict regarding anything to do with landlord-tenant issues. I noticed that today there are a number of delegations related to landlord-tenant issues. My question to you, Madam Chair,
Yep.
because we're at bare quorum, and if I have to remove myself as a result of that interest, how do we proceed in receiving or addressing those issues?
Councillor Marula, the item that does relate, I think, is a recommendation in report 8.2, which is simply the request by staff to hire an external consultant in order to put forward a list of recommendations to support council approved direction for a Renovations program. So it would be approval of funding to hire staff for that position. And not necessarily anything having to do with landlords per se. And in terms of the procedural question, if Councillor Marula deems that he requires himself to abstain from that vote, Elsie Bates, what would we do?
The procedural bylaws through the chair, have a remedy for this situation, and it is just that quorum is adjusted for the to remove the person the counselor who has a conflict, and then we vote with the rest of you will vote with the rest of the members who are present.
So, Madam Chair, just so I'm consistent, because when this issue did come up originally, I declared an interest. I will again today in order to prevent a conflict, and I'm doing so as a result of my wife and I being a landlord. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Marula. I wonder, Elsie Bates, shall we just separate out that portion of the report in terms of the recommendation, and can the councillor's need be addressed just with that one recommendation versus the remainder of 8.2, which has nothing to do with his conflict or declaration of interest?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, we can certainly do that.
Perfect.
We'll separate that section out.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Moving on to item number 4, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting. 4.1 is the November 4th, 2021, deferred from the November 18th meeting where we lost quorum, and item 4.2, which is the November 18th meeting as well. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the minutes? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. Any discussion on the approval of those minutes? Seeing none, we'll move to electronic vote. Carried. Moving on to communication items. Item number 5. The correspondences are listed and before committee members. Are there any request for discussion on any of the communication items? Seeing none, if I could please pass the chair to Vice Chair Jackson.
Okay, Councillor Nan, floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, item 5.6 and 5.8 from Michelle Cho and Carmen Orlandis speak to the cathedral shelter. And I reviewed those correspondences prior to committee meeting, and I believe there are a number of questions there that staff were able to respond to. There was a community meeting that was held earlier this week on Monday, so I would like to be able to keep the direction that's here, but just a quick question to Director John, if I could. If staff have received these correspondences as well, are you able to respond to the questions that remain?
Through the chair to the councillor, Edward John, Director of Housing Services. Absolutely. So as you mentioned, we were in a neighbourhood meeting this week. We were able to take a number of questions at that point, and we have received further correspondence. So our intent is to deliver a comprehensive response to all those questions, including those most recently received, and then circulate as an entire document to those that were in attendance and obviously those that submitted questions.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So I'm not going to seek any further direction there. Through you, I just wanted to get clarity that those questions will be responded to. And
At the time we deal with the report, Councillor Nan, is that
no, as per Director John's comments now, there is a procedure in place to make sure that all those answers are received in written form.
Perfect. Thank you for making that clarification. Thank you.
Excellent.
Chair's back to you.
Back to me. Thank you so much. So not seeing any other comments, do we need a mover and a seconder to receive these communications? Okay, moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Electronically. Carried. Moving on to delegation requests, item 6.1 through to 6.7. May I please have a mover and seconder to approve the delegation requests for today? Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Councillor Marula. And that carries. Moving on to consent item number 7 is 7.1 Senior Advisory Committee Minutes, October 1st, 2021. Deferred from our last committee meeting, moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Any discussion on the minutes from the Seniors Advisory Committee meeting? Seeing none, move to vote. Carried. Excellent. Moving on to 7, Striker Power Load Conveyance Equipment Standardization Report HSC 21038 citywide. Also deferred from our previous meeting. May I please have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Jackson. Any discussion on this item, colleagues? Seeing none, then we'll move forward to electronic. And that carries. Moving on to point 3, Reaching Home, Canada's Homeless Strategy Community Homelessness Report 2019 to 2020 and 2020 to 2021. HSC 21004. May I please have a mover and seconder to receive the item? Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Marula. Any discussion on this report? Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. And I'd just like to hear from Mr. John, if I may,
Mhm.
with respect to how we're tackling the need for supportive housing. It seems to me that the challenges that we're having with the increase in homelessness in our community, we have a number of residents who have challenges and they really need supportive housing, not just a hotel room or a bed. They need the supports to help them not only establish housing but maintain housing. I'd like to hear from Mr. John on that, if I may, please.
Certainly. Director?
Through the chair to the councillor, Edward John, Director of Housing Services. Thank you for that question. As probably heard me many times talk about the fundamental need for supportive housing. I will mention that under the housing services approach, we are able to provide various forms of supportive housing, residential care facilities, as well as intensive case management programs that support individuals transition from whether it's shelter or unsheltered situations into shelter. The principal gap, though, and the concern that we continue seem to have is for those individuals of higher acuity where our supports just do not extend far enough. And it's not just a case of us not being able to provide it, it's a case of us not being able to fund it, where it transfers over into a health issue. So through advocacy, through various means, we are making that intent known to the Ministry of Health and to our Ministry of Housing to make sure that we're able to provide in some point in the future truly integrated and coordinated supportive housing programs that do deal with that gap for those of higher acuity. As this report shows, we do provide some of those supports as we transfer individuals, but it's that gap that we are unable to address in any meaningful way.
And Chair Nan, is Morgan Stahl present today? Do you know? I don't think she was asked to be here, so. I'd like to hear in terms of how we're approaching the senior levels of government to secure what many in our community would deem to say is an urgent need for funding for supportive housing.
Through the chair to Councillor Clark, sorry, we've been using the more traditional and standard methods like through AMO, FCM, but we've also been doing additional advocacy through things like OBCM, the Ontario Big City Mayor's Caucus, in addition to outreach through the Mayor's office directly to those ministries. And Edward can also speak to the advocacy that we've done, perhaps through the officials and more bureaucratic channels as well.
Councillor?
I thank Morgan for the response. I'm going to ponder it and reflect on it because I think we're approaching well, we're not approaching, we are in a homelessness crisis. We're there, and the normal process, with all respect to Morgan and what she's trying to do, I understand it, doesn't seem to be working with the senior levels of government for whatever reason. So we need to figure out another way to obviously get their attention. It concerns me that we continue to have that 70 to 140 approximately people, residents in our community who are unhoused, homeless. Many of them have those acuity issues and they need that supportive housing, and we don't have the beds, period, let alone the supportive housing beds. So we clearly need to focus on that as we move forward, and I'll leave the rest of my comments until later in the meeting. Thank you, Chair Nan.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Just hang tight there. General Manager Mader did turn on her camera. I wanted to give her an opportunity to respond, please.
Sorry, no problem.
Thank you very much, Chair. Grace Mader, General Manager, Healthy and Safe Communities. Through the chair to Councillor Clark, we would love any help that this committee would be willing to offer us on this continued fight. We are the mechanisms already mentioned by Edward and Morgan. We're also looking at through OMSA, the Ontario Municipal Social Services Association, and also to working with the Greater Hamilton Health Network, our local OHT, also putting it on their radar about the need for this. Housing is also one of their priority areas. So we are trying to tap into all of those different components locally, but any support on those larger advocacy efforts, it would be greatly appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, General
Chair
Manager.
Nan, may I ask a supplementary?
Yep.
Is it possible then to get a report back in terms of what the OHT is actually doing on the file? I understand that it's relatively new to the Ministry of Health to be dealing with it. We've long argued as a municipality they should be more involved, given that many of the residents who find themselves homeless are unfortunately coming out of a psychiatric facility without the supports to actually ensure that they remain stable and healthy and enjoy their life in a safe environment. So can we get a report back in terms of what is actually happening with the OHT and the approach that we're taking with them?
Through the chair, Councillor Clark, absolutely. We can bring something back in January to the next meeting.
That would be wonderful. Thank you so much. Sorry,
Excellent.
Chair. Thank you.
No worries, Councillor Clark. I do want to, just for the record, make sure that does come forward in the form of a motion so that it gets in the outstanding business list. We're trying to stay consistent that way. So I'll come back to you when we get to notices of motion. We can lift it and bring it forward. Oh, you want to do it now? Okay, we can do it now. We don't need to do the waiving of the rules, right? We can just do a motion on the floor on the item. Perfect. Okay. So my words aren't going to help. Councillor Clark, go ahead.
No problem. Thank you, Chair Nan. So it's just, I would move that we direct staff to report back to this committee in January on the current efforts in dealing with the OHT with regards to increasing funding for supportive housing in Hamilton.
Confirming with clerks that you almost got it. Okay, excellent. It's moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jackson. We're just working out one quick typo. Colleagues, bear with us. And yep. Councillor Jackson's thumb is, I saw it wave at one point. Yep, there it is. Carried. Great. So much, Councillor Clark. Moving on to presentations, we have 8.1, the LGBTQ Advisory Committee Annual Report. I'd like to call on Cameron Croach and Rebecca Banky from the LGBTQ Advisory Committee to present the Advisory Committee's annual report. Cameron, Rebecca, if you could please both turn on your cameras and unmute your microphones. Oh, my apologies. Okay. Just hang tight there, both of you. There's one procedural item I didn't take care of before moving here, and that is receiving item 7.3. It'll be moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Clark. Oh, we already have Clark and Marula. We just needed to vote for it. My apologies, colleagues. Just a quick vote there. Carried. Okay. Sorry for that interruption. Please go ahead. Rebecca and Cameron.
Hi, thank you so much for having us here. This is our first time giving a annual presentation to your committee. Just to contextualize it, it's also the second time, I think, perhaps ever, in a very long time since we've ever been giving annual presentations. I think Councillor Clark, if I remember correctly, was on AFNA when we gave our last presentation. And this is just an opportunity for us to kind of talk about what we've been doing for the year and give you folks an opportunity to ask any questions you might have about what's gone on and to talk a bit about what'll be coming up. I'll introduce Rebecca when we switch from myself to her in the middle of the presentation. Otherwise, I'm going to share my screen. You should have it in front of you anyway, if I recall correctly, but I'll put it up here. Can you see that okay?
Yeah, yes, we can.
Okay, great. So thanks again for having us here. My name is Cameron Crutch. I'm the chair of the LGBTQ Advisory Committee for just the rest of this month. And I want to go over the year in review. So our committee's been very active. It's been active for the last couple of years since it first sat in May 15th, 2019. We've already had 12 meetings. We've had quorum for all of our meetings, so folks are very interested in the discussions that are happening there. And we put forward a number of recommendations. You haven't seen most of them at this committee. They've been primarily sent to AFNA when we were reporting to that standing committee, but most of them were successful. So there's been a lot of uptake for our recommendations. We'll talk about some of the highlights, but certainly one that stands out for me is around accessible captioning. But we'll get to that, I think, later. We received 10 delegations this year, so and we gave 8 delegations. So I want to highlight that, and it's significant because that's not necessarily what's happened in the past. We're seeing a lot of activity, and we are seeing staff coming forward wanting to talk to us about things that are happening. So that's good news. That shows collaboration, and it shows interest in hearing from advisory committees and getting advice, so appreciate that. We're going to go month by month and talk about some of our key milestones. January, we really got that finally, that all advisory committee event happening. That was successfully recommended. And it happened, I think, this past October, if I remember correctly. So that was a big thing, trying to get all the advisory committees together. We also talked about reviewing the process used to appoint new members to the LGBTQ Advisory Committee. Another big point for those in this committee who aren't aware, we had 15 members during the last term of council. That was moved down to 9. We asked if it could be brought back up to 15, and then went through a rather lengthy process over a couple of years of getting those 6 new members onto the committee. So pretty excited about that. Glad that concluded. We also delegated to try and talk about what that process might look like in February, and so what that meant in terms of focusing on areas where we felt there wasn't a lot of representation on our committee. One of the big reasons we asked for that increase was because we felt that there wasn't enough representation from all the different parts of LGBTQIA+ and Two-Spirit communities, and thankfully the city looked into that and made sure we had a more diverse representation. In March, there was a lot of delegations. So we had the Hamilton Police Service come to delegate. We had folks from the Economic Development Action Plan come to delegate. Some rather long and significant conversations there. Those aren't preserved, unfortunately, so you can't go back and see them. If you have questions about that, happy to answer them. We also approved a new land acknowledgement. This is significant because it was developed by Two-Spirit and LGBTQIA+ youth, Indigenous youth, from the committee. It was an initiative of the committee, and we've been using it ever since. In April, again, a lot of delegations, but also some looking forward towards Pride. So in April, we started to consider that Pride was coming up in June, and we put a community survey out through Engage Hamilton. So that was the first time we had done that and used that process. Thought was pretty successful, if I could just remark, in terms of getting that out to the community, getting some feedback about how the community saw the city of Hamilton celebrating Pride. And then from that survey and the recommendations that came back, we then made recommendations to the city. We also tried to recommend a clearer process for advisory committees to delegate to standing committees, which was actually also, although not accepted, clarifying. So we figured out how we could better interact with the standing committee to which we report, and that's been super helpful. In May, we finally welcomed 6 new members to our committee, which was a big deal, and one of whom is here today. And we also received a delegation from a trans woman who had been assaulted by a police officer. She came and spoke to us at length, and we had that discussion in public. And then finally, we recommended a celebration of Pride by the city, and there's a whole report you can look at that was sent to AFNA about that. Then in June, we held a community conversation, which we invited you all to attend, to listen to members of Two-Spirit and LGBTQI plus communities in Hamilton on the 2-year anniversary of the violence at Pride, speak to what they saw as opportunities for the city to better support communities. And so those panelists made a list of recommendations that kind of overlap, dovetail with recommendations by a consultant. And then after those processes were over, we sent that information onto folks for adoption, and it was adopted. And in July, we received a delegation from the city's election staff about barriers for participation for members of Two-Spirit and LGBTQA plus communities, which was really helpful, really clarifying for everyone there, and our ideas were receptively taken up. We appreciated that. We also claimed a recording secretary, and that recording secretary is Rebecca Banky, who's here with us now, and I'm going to let Rebecca take over the rest of this presentation. I just want to say that Rebecca was recently acclaimed to be the chair for 2022, and so what we're actively trying to do in our committee is transition planning. So we made sure that we held our elections early in this year, so we knew who the next chair would be, and we invited Rebecca to share this presentation so that we could work together on transition while she takes over the chair duties. And I'll be quiet now and I'll let Rebecca carry on.
Yeah, can everyone hear me okay? Cool. So yeah, I'm something of a transition expert, and that's kind of a focus for us. So part of what's been really exciting for me is joining the work of this committee. As has been alluded to already, I was a new member, got to be the recording secretary for much of the year, got to be part of agenda setting, and Cameron's been helping me understand what it's going to mean to take over chairing next year. We had our elections a little earlier than normal, so we can do some of this stuff. This is really a mentoring opportunity, so I'm grateful to be included in it, and really grateful for all of your time to listen to us and let us talk about all the stuff we got to do that we were really enthusiastic about. In August, we recommended the change to the standing committee that we're reporting to, which is obviously why we're having this conversation with you folks now. It felt like it would be a much better fit to be engaged with somebody who was doing more of the community service work that was aligned with the agenda and the work of our advisory committee. And that was a bit of a process, and we needed to carefully consult the people who were serving on our advisory committee. So it took longer to make this change than it might have intuitively seemed like it should, but it was important that everyone feel like they were engaged in that and we're making a good choice that felt like a long-term fit. There was also some discussion about barriers about retention of recording advisory committee meetings. There was a discussion that happened where members of advisory committee meetings were surveyed about their comfort with recordings, some discussion of how easy it is for things to be retained by the public, and a bit of a lens to the kind of queer focus. There's a lot of history in the queer community with online doxing and people kind of being unfairly targeted using recorded and public material. So we let members of our community discuss their concerns around those things. It was a fruitful conversation, although ultimately we all know where the conversation settled. I'm glad we got to talk about it though. Cameron, I think you can take me to the next slide if that's okay.
Sorry, I just froze 1 second. I'm going to try this again.
No trouble.
Sorry.
Also, remote meetings, great because technical difficulties.
Yeah, truly. Having a real one right now. Just give me a second. I'm like in here twice, I think.
That's true. We just couldn't get enough of you.
Cameron, this is Tamara from the clerk's office. I don't see you twice in the meeting, but it's difficult to say, oh, yes, I'm getting confirmation that you are twice.
I think I fixed it. Can you see that now?
We see August still.
Yes.
Perfect. That's important. Yeah, great. Thanks.
Mm-hmm. I am ready to talk about September when you're ready. Wonderful. Okay, so this is the report based on the community conversation that we had. We got that feedback, and then there were a few committee meetings where we had to kind of amend it based on recommendations that had already been made to council. So we weren't rereading redundant information. So that process happened, and we got to make this recommendation, which I'm really excited about. And then there's a discussion about changing the name of the committee to be more inclusive to the communities that we both represent and aim to represent more effectively. But because our committee is more diverse than it once was, but maybe not sufficiently diverse to represent our whole community and the kind of experience of the city of Hamilton, we wanted to engage in some feedback with Two-Spirit community members especially. So we talked about what that process would look like, and we appointed a working group, I believe is the correct term for it, and that working group gave us a report on the subject. And then in October, we welcomed Sunil as our new staff liaison, who's been absolutely wonderful and really supportive. We've had great success with our staff liaisons, and I felt really much more able to do the work of a volunteer with the support that they've provided. We also received an update from the Hamilton Police Services about the progress on the Bergman report recommendations, and these were really, really detailed. And there was a lot of information we wanted to go over, and there were lots of community members who had very valid and very passionate opinions about how those issues were being tackled by the Hamilton Police Service. So we received this communication and we discussed it at some length, but we wanted to receive a delegation to sort of speak and discuss that more thoroughly. So that was part of the conversation that happened in our October meeting and led to a delegation in our November meeting, which we can now talk about. We also received a really beautiful delegation from about rainbow crosswalks in Waterdown from an absolutely amazing woman who told a really heartbreaking and passionate story. I found the work of this committee is really interesting. Sometimes it's challenging procedural work, and sometimes it's like heart-wrenching, really emotional stories from community members that are really like beautiful to hear or hard to hear. We talk about the struggles of a community that I'm proud to be a part of living in the city, but also some of the successes that can come out of that. And it was really amazing to be able to consult on this. Although she did mention that the delegatory process and the kind of engagement with that was a bit more challenging than she would have liked it to be. I think sometimes people don't necessarily have as much awareness of the support we can provide them and that delegation. So it was good to examine how the work that we care very much about doing is sometimes stymied by some of the procedural things that can be a bit more challenging, and how to navigate that best. As I alluded to in the October discussion, we also received a delegation from the Hamilton Police Services. Rebecca Moran talked about some of those things, gave us clarity about them, let us kind of understand elements that were like kind of policy changes in effect. And we got to ask her some questions about kind of what was being done. I think there's a lot of good faith being made in terms of trying to progress on some of these issues, but I think there's a lot of very open wounds in our community about some of the challenges with the police services. So she's offered to speak to us again when there was more information about it, and to come back and to delegate to the committee again. And I feel really positive about that dialogue, despite there being a lot of tensions, a lot of challenges and things about it that are really difficult. As Cameron mentioned before, we also held our election early. So this is an election for January. We elected a chair, a vice chair, and a recording secretary. I was elected as chair, and we appointed a new recording secretary, a responsibility I'm more than happy to hand off to our new capable recording secretary. Writing the minutes for this committee has been a labor of love, but no mistake, a labor for sure. We also recommended our 2022 budget, which you're welcome to talk about and ask questions about. And we made sort of final allocations from our 2021 budget. There's a bit of confusion about that. We understand the process a little bit better. So there are some mistakes we made that allowed us to allocate fewer resources than we originally intended. And we have a good working plan for what that's going to look like to be different in 2022. And then there was the recommendations for the new code of conduct. There were some challenges around this code of conduct, some things that were just maybe not as sufficiently clear as we would have liked them to be, that made it difficult to understand where the line. I think it's really important when it comes to issues related to the integrity commissioner that we have very, very clear understanding of what our responsibilities and our burdens are. I read the handbook that was given to us every meeting and in advance of every meeting to just kind of really refresh on some of those policy things. And the new code of conduct has some opportunity for constructive review in a pretty big way. And we made some recommendations around this at our November meeting and discussed some of those things. again, I've talked already a little bit about how there's really amazing work being done, but there's some really challenging procedural hangups. And I think this is an opportunity to just prevent that from being bigger than it has been. In December, we have not yet had our meeting. It's coming up in a handful of days. If any of you want to tune in, we've got it on the 21st, I believe. And we have notices of motion for financial updates, integration into staff work plans, which I'm really excited about. This will help kind of address the problem of kind of getting delegated to too late in a project plan to meaningfully make the suggestions we want. And we're getting some great support from your committee about this. And then the All Advisory Committee events for 2022, which we felt were a really amazing opportunity to network with other people in the community doing work around how we can help inform counselor perspective with understanding from community members who might not be large enough as a group or an interest to be represented on council, but help have our perspective known so you can better understand and serve all of your constituents. So that intersection of experience has been a really amazing way to kind of help each other be more effective at what we're doing. And I'm excited to be a participant in more of it. 2021 was a really interesting year for a whole bunch of reasons. But for our committee, being virtual and reporting in this way, I think we're conscious of some accessibility issues. Accessible captioning was a big recommendation that we pushed for a couple of different ways. And I think we were a little bit disappointed to not see more progress made on this particular front. And it's something we'd really like to see prioritized and information back a couple of times that's kind of still being worked on or that there are challenges around it. But there's a little bit of lack of clarity about what a real timeline looks like. And I think it's been difficult for some of the people who would like to be engaged in the process we're working on, but haven't maybe have barriers to that are not being well served. We've also, I've alluded to this a little bit before, and I think Cameron has much more perspective on it than I do, but informal changes to the process and procedure have required a lot of us sometimes. And I don't think this is any singular person's fault, or I don't believe it to be adversarial in nature, but I think there are systemic forces at play here that make it really difficult sometimes when we're asked to just kind of make a small change as behaving in the role of chair. Sometimes those changes are not a comma or a typo or a missed word. They change the meaning, or they ask us to change meaning to be more in line with the needs of council. And we are not empowered under the current recommendation for approach to make those changes if we are not in quorum in a sitting meeting. So it can delay recommendations by sometimes many months. And the way that those requests are made sometimes present them as if the chair could simply make that change unilaterally. And that's not behavior that's consistent with the expectations of the chair of this committee. And I think that's made it a little bit more difficult to really do the kind of work that we want to be doing. And we've written down here that remote communication remains a challenge. I'm sure I don't need to convince anyone of that particular fact, but it's a factor. And I think we've worked really hard to still be effective as a team, but we appointed 6 new members and our integration process has been exclusively virtual. And it's hard sometimes to know who you're working with and really connect passionately over shared interests without having some of the signaling that's present in person that isn't the same way virtually. Nevertheless, we persevered. For 2022, I guess this is in many ways my agenda now, although I'm looking to Cameron to give me a lot of support in making this transition. We're going to participate in some important milestones, hopefully appointing additional committee members. It was really wonderful to bring in the breath of fresh air. I speak as a member of the community who saw the work of the committee, and also as a new person coming into this work, enthusiastically bringing our love for our community to municipal advocacy work, which I think is really important and really beautiful. And we'd love to be able to bring some voices into that process to fill seats where people have stepped down or have had to step away from the project. We're also reviewing our mandate and a name change. We talked a little bit before about the community consultation around that, but I think it's important that we understand our purpose so we can be focused in our efforts. There's the optimistic potential in-person celebration of Pride in 2022. It's a galvanizing community event that I've missed in my life. And I think Hamilton has in the past done a really beautiful job of this celebration and has the capacity to make it something that feels very healing for the community. But we've been unable to experience that. And I'd like to hopefully move forward with it. We're also looking at the mentioned changes to the Code of Conduct and Advisory Committee Handbook. These have the opportunity to provide us a lot of tools, a lot of clarity, and a lot of strength to do our work more effectively, if done right. And I encourage everyone who has the opportunity to look those things over to advocate for an effective version of that holds us to a standard appropriate to people who are paid in sandwiches that we have not yet received for those of us working virtually. And then ideally, the resumption of in-person meetings and the opportunity to make some of those meaningful connections that I spoke of before and to consume the aforementioned sandwiches.
Thank you both. That brings us to the end of your presentation. Now you got me thinking about sandwiches.
We're both more than happy to answer questions, however.
Excellent. Colleagues, the floor is open for questions. I do have myself on the list, but I'll wait until after my committee members have had a chance to ask theirs. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can I just inquire, perhaps, for a little bit of elaboration with regards to the challenge of the reports coming up to this committee. I believe the delegate indicated that there were some issues, I guess, with language, or I'm not sure exactly. I'd like to understand it better, if I may ask, please.
Cameron, I think you're maybe the best person to speak to this question.
Yeah, I think it's going to come up actually sooner than we realize in terms of this meeting today. I think the next item on the agenda is actually discussion of a report. Yeah, I mean, to elaborate, the chair of the LGBTQ Advisory Committee is there to help facilitate meetings. And those meetings and those decisions we make and the collective choices the committee can make as recommendations happen in public at those meetings. Once the committee sort of signs off on those citizen committee reports or those recommendations, I'm required kind of to sign my name on that and send it in, and I do. I can't change those after the fact, under any circumstance. Even if there's something in there that maybe doesn't agree with a decision of council. If it's something that doesn't agree with a policy or bylaw, I still can't change it. That's the recommendation the committee chose to make. In the best information that it had in the moment, it made that decision. If there's, of course, like a typographical error, or if I've erroneously put something in there that wasn't within the spirit of the committee's recommendation, like, of course, those things can be changed. But there's been back and forth anyways about, hey, can you change this? And the answer is no, I can't. And so this committee makes recommendations in good faith. They come forward. If there's problems with them, great. I mean, the position's always been, I think, of advice, generally speaking. Take it if you wish. It's a recommendation we're putting forward. If you don't wish to take it, don't. But as a volunteer committee, we only have so much access to information, and we make these recommendations in a good faith based on what we know in the moment, right? So if there are things that come up later, cool. This is the forum to have those discussions, right? But we can't go backwards. Also, though, and as I've said before, if there are really serious problems, they can just send the reports back to the committee itself. I think what Rebecca was identifying was that the chair is often put in a weird spot in between meetings where they're being asked to adjudicate this stuff. Just isn't the way to do it. The committee itself is responsible for the recommendations, and if there are problems with them, they should go right back to the committee. So that's what Rebecca was identifying. It's happened a number of times over the course of this, not, I would say, to this committee specifically. I think the probably most apparent example of this, and the most obvious to everybody here, not that I wish to bring this up at length, was our May 15th, 2019 motion, right? Which should have just gone back to the committee to be reviewed, and instead went on this huge procedural journey that had to eventually get approved the following year. So there's that example, there's today's example, there are others, but essentially trying to clarify the process, it's the committee who makes these recommendations, not the chair, period.
With the chair's discretion, can I elaborate slightly?
Yep, if you're answering the question that Councillor Clark posed. Yep.
Yeah, so Councillor Clark asked the question about the challenges associated with needing to change wording or having our recommendations pushed back. I think it's really important that the chair in those contexts not behave unilaterally, not only because that's the dictated policy by our handbook, but also because chairs behaving even informally in a unilateral context, they challenge our likelihood of being able to obtain quorum and the confidence that the members of the advisory committee have in our work as a facilitator and not an arbiter of the committee. It's been really beautiful to have successful, yep.
David's, sorry. My apologies, Councillor Clark.
So to clarify or summarize, what you're indicating is that it's the verbiage of the recommendation from the advisory committee that you've had experience that it has been suggested that it be edited after the committee meeting has met, putting the chair or the vice chair in the awkward position of making that decision. And you're indicating that it wasn't a minor, because it's not unusual for a resolution to be passed at a standing committee on council, and the chair will meet with the clerk, and the clerk has done their best to transcribe it, and there may be minor changes, but at the end of the day, it comes up to council, and then council can ratify or modify it in a way, shape, or form. So you don't have that opportunity, and so you're basically asking that the recommendation verbiage remain as it was approved by the committee before it comes to this committee. I'm paraphrasing. I think I've captured it.
Yeah, I think you captured it. Sorry,
Okay.
Rebecca.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any other questions, colleagues? Seeing none, Councillor Jackson, could you please take the chair?
Floor is yours, Councillor.
Thank you. Thank you both for your presentation. I have to admit, this is the first time that I've had a committee annual report to any of the standing committees other than those that come forward through citizen reports and the occasional delegation. So I appreciate the recap on the work that the advisory committee has been up to over the last year. I had a couple of questions. So the new land acknowledgement that the advisory committee members developed in, I guess, with Indigenous Two-Spirit folks, has that land acknowledgement been shared to staff and or the Aboriginal Advisory Committee? And when I asked about staff, I meant specifically, sorry, the Urban Indigenous Strategy staff here in the city.
Yeah, I can answer that. When it came forward, I remember getting an email saying something like, this has been reviewed by staff and there was something going on with it, like it was being sent around or something for discussion. That never ended up going anywhere as far as I know. I'm not sure exactly where that was being sent. At that time, Pauline Kajura was our staff liaison. So I would suggest checking with Pauline because I know that she had sent that note to me. And otherwise, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, because I'm not sure that it seemed like it was a decision the committee was permitted to make on its own in terms of how it gave a land acknowledgement. So we kind of, I guess, thought that was an internal decision. And I think Pauline confirmed that. It was like an internal thing. And the person on our committee is Indigenous youth, went back to the community they're part of. They developed this together and brought it forward. So that's the process we used, but certainly check with Pauline.
Thank you. And on the accessible captioning, it's my understanding that WebEx is now able to do that through you to legislative clerks. Is there any updates on the accessible captioning? I know that staff have been working on that on the background as well. Is there a sense of timeline when that is coming forward?
Elsie Bates, can you help us with that, please?
Yes, sorry, through the chair. I'm not aware of the timeline right now. I can see what I can find out though.
Okay, no problem. Thank you. Those are my questions for now. I apologize. I am a little bit distracted. I've gotten a not so great news report from my child at school. So I am a little distracted and I'll hold my questions for now from the advisory committee. If I do have any further ones, if you're okay with it, I will email them to the advisory committee chairs. Thank you.
Thoughts are with you, Councillor Nan, and chairs back to you.
Thank you. Moving forward then, if there's no further questions of our advisory committee representatives, We are to receive the report. Did we have a mover and seconder? No. So could I get a mover and seconder? Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Could we get an electronic vote?
And Chair, just with thanks from the committee, this is
Oh,
an excellent annual report that we received from this committee. Maybe something we want to look at, but thank you very much.
I agree. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Through the chair, this is Legislative Coordinator Tamara Bates. The advisory committees do report annually to that report to ENCS do report annually. Last year they did not because I believe because of COVID. This year the remaining committees are going to be giving their annual reports at the January meeting.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, thanks for that update. And that motion, I think we have carried it. So thank you again, advisory committee reps. Looking forward to January as well for the rest of the advisory committee's reports as well. Thank you. Moving on to agenda item 8.2, Adaptation and Transformation of Services for People Experiencing Homelessness, update number 4. May I please call on Edward John, Director of Housing Services, to give their presentation. Edward, please turn on your camera, unmute your microphone, and the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of committee. Edward John, Director of Housing Services. I am going to be assisted today by my colleague, Nadia Zelensko, who will be forwarding the slides for me, so apologies when I ask for the advance. I do want to start to take pause and truly thank the many agencies, individuals, and staff who really have come together with respect to this transition planning and the emergency response to the pandemic. I assure you, none of us ever thought we would still be in this part of time after 18 long months, still working on transition elements. It has been an incredible and enduring moment for my staff and these agencies who have truly created miracles. We appreciate there's a long way to go, and we are certainly not there yet, but I would be remiss not to acknowledge the efforts and the amazing coordination that's taken place. There are two parts to this presentation, so I will give a verbal update in terms of the transition report and speak to those salient recommendations. And then the second part is the formal PowerPoint presentation. On that piece, I will say that the PowerPoint presentation really speaks to the journey where we move from the transition to the end goal. And so just Councillor Nan, hearing if there are time constraints, I am more than happy to go with the verbal update. I'm not going to say my presentation is long. It is, let's characterize it as detailed and can wait. I mean, this really is an overview of our system, but I'm in the hands of committee if that's going to be an issue.
No, Director, please proceed.
Thank you. So in terms of the report itself, the recommendations truly balance ongoing emergency needs and our goal to continue to support and implement a thoughtful transition to a more responsive, resilient, sustainable, and housing-focused homeless serving system. We're really looking to maintain stability within the system through the transition to the next phase of the pandemic response. It's critical, and it will allow us to meet ongoing health and safety needs while also continuing a focus on permanent housing solutions that get people housed and, most importantly, keep them housed. There are enhanced efforts in the coming weeks, months to test and refine the new models for prioritization to connect people from the by name list to appropriate housing resources, as well as continued collaborative development of coordinated access policies, which you'll hear in my presentation, to support housing placements of 150 households in a current 90 days of action campaign within the sector. As I mentioned, COVID isn't over. Although provincial COVID restrictions continue to be lifted, our ongoing approach to health and safety through emergency supports and congregate settings is based on detailed discussions with sector and health partners. A major aspect of our work continues to be prioritizing collaborative work with the local Indigenous leadership to develop connections to housing and supports that are culturally appropriate, rooted in the spirit and actions of reconciliation that recognize the values of autonomy and self-determination. So meeting some of those immediate needs and looking at broader solutions, a portion of the report will focus is on continuing adapted and enhanced emergency supports. These are ones that we've already have in place and recognize that we need to continue. We're also looking at enhanced winter response funding. Learnings from winter 2020 to 2021 informed the need to have flexible fund for support of independent agencies and community entities who may be interested in supporting vulnerable residents, but who may not have the operational funds to be viable. We've also created an emerging needs fund for Indigenous community members, Indigenous designed and led response. There's also the distinct focus on the need for gender-specific emergency and housing supports for women, trans feminine, trans masculine, and non-binary adults. And through improvements to WICA Carol Ann's Place, adapting Cathedral to temporarily serve women as it currently serves men, and the previously approved women's emergency shelter proposal homes of Emma's Place and the 15 beds, which this committee has heard previously. I do want to mention on that Indigenous-led solutions, there is beyond immediate recommendation for the Emerging Needs Fund ongoing dialogue with the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership regarding equitable access to resources and the support urban Indigenous communities for that need for Indigenous-led capital solutions. The report also speaks to some of the proactive work we've done through the pandemic on housing affordability and eviction prevention. The report speaks to the success so far of the Tenant Defense Fund, how we've responded and created a Rent Ready program, which has really ensured a number of those vulnerable residents are kept housed as evictions have resumed, and that has been a pressing need to stop more people entering the homelessness system. In terms of being more direct and carrying on with the Renovations work, we are recommending that we hire a consultant designed to implement our framework, one that can be robustly defensive against some of the provincial and local rules and regulations and requirements. And then finally, there is a quarterly snapshot as directed by councillors at our previous meeting. The snapshot reports on key data on the state of homelessness and actions towards preventing and ending homelessness. On that note, I will now begin my formal presentation and will ask Nadia to advance the first slide. So I wanted to ground our conversation today by addressing our decision this week to pause admissions of couples to emergency shelter response due to a number of challenges, and most notably the rising incidence of domestic violence. This decision was not made lightly. It was driven by a motivation to provide a more responsive and safe system. As you know, prior to the pandemic, Hamilton did not have a dedicated shelter space for couples. This is something we introduced in 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. We have learned through this period that the city's hotel-based temporary emergency shelter spaces require greater supports in terms of delivering that safe system, as well as meeting some of those acute mental health and addiction-related challenges. Our next steps on this issue are to engage our partners in undertaking an evaluation to determine an appropriate model for delivery of an evidence-based couples emergency shelter response. One that accounts for the needs of women in situations of domestic violence, with the aim to ensuring their safety. To ensure it can continue to accommodate people who need shelter, the city's hotel-based shelter system will focus on increasing space for single women and will seek that men access available spaces in the men's system. Couples who wish to develop joint housing plans to secure permanent housing together will be supported to do so. This existing process allows for consideration of safety and risk assessments. This really does speak to the complexity of the barriers facing people as they embark their journey to obtain sustainable housing and the complexity required in our response. One of the strengths of our system is the ability to learn and adapt quickly as a community to address emerging or evolving needs while keeping our sights on the long-term goal of ending homelessness. Let's to advance the slides. I expect that most of you are looking at our goal to end homelessness while looking at the encampments and the pressures in the shelter system. And you're right to look at this with some skepticism. It is an audacious goal with a long timeline needed to see progress. We know homelessness is a complex social challenge with many structural drivers that we are not able to eliminate. We know that we cannot end all experiences of homelessness forever. What we are looking to do as a community is to build a housing response system that ensures homelessness is prevented wherever possible, or if it cannot be prevented, it is rare, brief, and non. We're at a critical juncture where we need to solidify community commitment to this long-term goal. This reality is short-term emergency response, and the temporary significant expansion within our shelter system is unsustainable, both financially and from a staffing perspective. We've had over 200 additional unique users to this system alone this year, which is unprecedented. An emergency response that focuses on capacity distracts and diverts investment from our longer-term investment in permanent housing solutions. Although these emergency efforts have been essential during the pandemic and will continue to be so for the coming months, we must absolutely continue to balance the outflow in housing placements as a solution. We must see housing placements as part of an emergency response as important, if not more, than shelter. And we have a strategy to do just that. The two reports shared from HSD today on our transition strategy and community homelessness report showcase both our long-term homelessness ending strategy and progress it along, as well as our plan for moving beyond the emergency response demanded by the pandemic. Together with our community partners, we are working with individuals and families every day to prevent and solve their experience of homelessness. Collectively, this rolls up into a big impact in our community. This means as a system, we are able to quickly identify and engage people at risk of experiencing homelessness, intervene to prevent the loss of housing and divert people from entering the housing crisis. When homelessness does occur, provide immediate access to shelter and crisis services without barriers to entry, while permanent stable housing and appropriate supports are secured. Quickly connect people to housing assistance and services tailored to their unique needs and strengths to help them achieve and maintain stable housing. Could advance the slide, please, Nadia. Our homelessness strategy is grounded in recognition of Indigenous homelessness as a colonial legacy. Indigenous peoples experience homelessness, as well as other forms of social exclusion, at a higher rate than the general population. The interconnectedness of historical and ongoing colonialism, residential schools, intergenerational trauma, and ongoing systemic social and economic marginalization of Indigenous peoples drive our action towards addressing Indigenous homelessness in Hamilton. As a homelessness serving system, we are committed to working with our Indigenous leaders to address systemic overrepresentation of Indigenous persons experiencing homelessness. The Coalition of Hamilton's Indigenous Leadership, CHIL, serves as the Indigenous community entity for Reaching Home, which is the federal homelessness strategy, and brings vital knowledge and leadership to all areas of planning, strategies, and policy development. The city and CHIL work as funder to funder. The city prioritizes collaborative work with Indigenous leadership in all aspects of homelessness strategy and policy. This includes collaboration in development of coordinated access system, including the governance policies and practices to ensure Indigenous people are prioritized for housing resources and offered culturally appropriate supports in culturally sensitive ways. We are working together to put these recommendations into practice. In terms of funding, 20% of federal homeless funding since 2004. We have the Indigenous-led Poverty Reduction Fund. We have provincial project funding and a minimum 20% of housing affordability resources dedicated to this effect. You can forward the slide, please, Nadia. Hamilton has had a long history and reputation for shaping policy and innovation in housing and homelessness strategies and best practice interventions. Hamilton has contributed to both the current provincial and federal policy frameworks, marking the shift from managing homelessness to ending homelessness. In December 2016, Housing Services Division contracted with the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness to support Hamilton's ongoing efforts to develop a coordinated access system for the homelessness service sector, beginning with a by-name priority list. Hamilton was invited along with 6 other communities across Canada to participate in 20,000 homes built for zero collaboration, led by the Canadian Alliance. Locally, our community has galvanized around the goal of ending homelessness since the 2010 launch of our advisory committee. In 2019, we launched our systems planning framework based on many years of community engagement to crystallize our homelessness ending philosophy and strategy. In terms of innovation, 3 long-standing system planning tables, our Men's Emergency Service Committee, Women's Homelessness Planning Committee, and our Street Youth Planning, include people with lived experience, and both have conducted community-engaged research in partnership with Canadian Observatory on Homelessness to inform program innovation and policy change in Hamilton. Can you forward the slide, please, Nadia? Thank you. Our strategy to end homelessness is grounded in the broader vision of our Housing and Homelessness Action Plan to ensure that everyone in Hamilton has a home. Our overarching homelessness prevention and ending strategy includes these three components: supply, increasing the supply of affordable housing; access, managing access to affordable housing to keep people housed; and supports, investment in program components and overall integration of Hamilton's coordinated access system to quickly, transparently, and equitably end the experience of homelessness for individuals and families. The voice of lived experience, community members through a years-long consultation exercise was central to shaping the strategies of the action plan that continue to guide our work today. We'd advance the slide, please, Nadia. However, we must look at this vision with the recognition that homelessness serving systems exist because people have fallen through the cracks of every other system. This means we are coming in to respond when people are already in crisis. We know that we cannot solve homelessness through the homelessness serving system alone. We need to work with health, community, education, and justice partners to support early intervention to prevent people from accessing our system and to prevent them from returning to homelessness. We are actively cultivating these relationships through each of the core program components of our homelessness serving system. There's also a deep need for structural solutions to ensure people have adequate incomes and social protections, as well as policies to prevent financialization of housing and to support deep and long-lasting affordability solutions. Although we do engage with our federal and provincial partners on these structural and policy solutions, we do not have direct influence on those areas. That's the slide, thank you. I'll take a moment to state the obvious. The only known solution to homelessness is housing. It's not just about the quantity of housing, but also about the types of housing and that are available, and ensuring we have a continuum within our system. Understanding the causes of homelessness is important in determining how best to respond. Structural, social assistance rates, livable wage, housing market, employment rates, individual level, unique series of circumstances that contribute to the risk of homelessness. System failures are those where house systems are designed to serve people to produce an outcome such as healthcare, child welfare, child protection, safety, housing, and homelessness to provide people with housing stability. We cannot necessarily control the flow into homelessness, but we do have the ability to determine how the local community responds. It's within this sphere that local communities has the greatest influence in ending homelessness. Chronic homelessness is based on how long a person experiences homelessness for. For this reason, our emphasis today is on homelessness response systems that we're building locally to ensure that when people do become homeless, that we are able to quickly mobilize as a community to ensure that experience is brief and non-recurring. That's a slide, thank you. Ending homelessness requires a system response. We're in good company as part of the Built for Zero movement, including 13 communities in the US and several communities in Canada, such as Medicine Hat, which have seen significant reduction in homelessness by taking a coordinated access approach. Hamilton started development of our coordinated access system in 2016, building on decades of collaboration. Our whole homelessness serving sector has been part of developing core elements of coordinated access over the past few years, including coordinated entry, triage, and assessment. Common assessment supports a community-wide approach to assessing and triaging clients to effectively identify and connect them with the right range of supports. This helps moves from an approach where clients are served by single organizations to one where we take shared responsibility for ensuring everyone accesses the right to housing as quickly and efficiently as possible. Coordinated access is not a program, it is the process through which we work together as a system to streamline the way people experience homelessness, access housing support services needed to permanently end the homelessness. This is through standardizing the intake and assessment process, through common tools and understanding, sharing information across the homelessness serving system in real time, adopting uniform prioritization policies, and coordinating referral processes. Working in partnership with CHIL to ensure Indigenous values and self-determination are embedded in both mainstream and Indigenous-led service streams through coordinated access. This includes actioning recommendations from a national resource produced by Hamilton Partners to enact Indigenous best practices towards a holistic systems approach towards ending homelessness. Our coordinated access system follows the principle of housing first and shares real-time data to facilitate the housing process. This ensures we get the most out of limited resources and we can more rapidly and effectively prevent and end homelessness for those in greatest need. This helps us move from an approach where clients are served by single organizations based on first come, first serve, or on who has the most effective advocate, to one where we take shared responsibility for ensuring everyone accesses the right to housing as quickly, transparently, and as effectively as possible. While we have a quality by name list for a few years, we have not fully employed its value. Currently, agencies receive a by name list regularly, though we do not have guidance on how to filter this list to connect people who can most benefit from those programs. As of September, there were 1,390 people active on the BNL list. The next step is to align on a model of prioritization criteria that we can use commonly to match people to the right level of housing. It is important to note that there are not enough resources or program spaces to support everyone who needs it in the same way. However, the by name list and process of prioritization allows us to address bottlenecks in our system, one that has grown significantly over the past 18 months, by providing common direction, clear and transparent processes and expectations for staff and clients, as well as the most appropriate use of limited resources. It also allows us to connect people with additional community resources, whether it be landlords or social service supports offered more broadly. We realize our programs cannot solve homelessness alone. Our community is our greatest resource. We can advance, thank you. HIFIS and the by name list form the basis of Hamilton's homelessness management information system, which underpins our coordinated access system. Together, they form a robust data system supporting identification and prioritization at a household level, while also providing an understanding of homelessness inflow and outflow at a system level. A by name list is simply not a list of clients experiencing homelessness, nor is it a chronological list or wait list for service. Data drawn from HIFIS and consolidated in the by name list is used to triage connection to specific services based on level of need, preferences, and available resources. It is also an advocacy and systems planning tool to monitor performance, evaluate and identify gaps and areas for improvement, and support advocacies for the policies and resources necessary to end homelessness. It is worthwhile to outline key elements of each slide to better understand, as presented in this slide, the capabilities that they offer, as well as the limitations. Advance one more. Thank you, Nadia. With limited resources, coordinated access enables us to work as a community to use those resources in an efficient, equitable, and transparent way. It moves us from a model of first come, first serve, where those with the loudest voice or strongest advocates take priority over those with the greatest need. As this slide shows, key components of that coordinated access include coordinated entry, prevention, diversion, the use of shelters, the focus on outreach, and the coordinated passage that really details those other elements such as rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and intensive case management or assertive community treatment. Coordinated exits ultimately is our goal to get people into safe, suitable, and sustainable housing placements. While some people experiencing homelessness will apply to our waitlists and obtain a community housing unit, the majority of people who exit homelessness find suitable housing on the private market. In fact, in 2021, 88% of housing placements for people on the by name list were in the private market. This may take the form of secondary suites, rooming houses, shared accommodation with roommates, or independent apartments. A small number of people with very high acuity or very complex needs, currently about 10% of our homelessness population, require permanent supportive housing. There are some existing permanent supportive housing units in our community, such as through Indwell, Good Shepherd, Wesley, and CMHA, as well as 780 spaces at RCFs and subsidized by the city. However, low barrier permanent supportive housings remain a limited resource in our community, one that we are actively seeking to address through partnership with health and community housing providers. The next slide, this is, and I won't go through in detail, but this is what coordinating access looks like in practice in terms of the flow, the importance of diversion and coordination, with that ultimate goal of finding the right resources for the right individual to get them housed and keep them housed. Advance the slide one more. Although we know that coordinated access works to end the experience of homelessness for individuals experiencing and to reduce overall homelessness in the community, we've faced many obstacles to actualizing our homelessness strategy in the past 2 years. As you're well aware, COVID-19 has imposed significant hardship in our community as well as our homeless response system. We've seen across Canada loss of income and the resulting financial burden on individuals and families, exerting pressure on all of the areas of the social safety net that help to prevent people from falling into core housing need or the crisis of homelessness. Our whole sector is acutely feeling the impact of growing housing unaffordability in the private market, at the same time that we are working proactively to slow the loss of community housing stock through the end of service agreements with federal and provincial governments. In short, the demand for affordable housing continues to grow while we struggle to maintain supply. At the same time, we're seeing unprecedented stress and turnover among staff in our sector as they address a surge in unsheltered homelessness, compounded by mental health and addiction crises far exceeding what was seen in the past. Meanwhile, and this is important to note, Provincial Bill 124 has enforced a retroactive wage freeze impacting nonprofit partners receiving more than $1 million per year from the provincial government. This compensation freeze impairs the sector's ability to hire staff at competitive wages at a time when pressures on staff have increased dramatically. This poses a risk to program delivery and sustainability. The enduring complexity of the challenge to support people in encampments to find safe and suitable housing solutions has forged tensions in our community and our sector, which is leading to divided efforts. We're working hard to reach out to people in encampments to support their immediate needs and work on their housing goals, while actively pursuing new partnerships and resources to support those with complex needs access and retain housing with supports. It has never been more important to move together, aligned as a community around our shared goal to keep and get people housed. When the pandemic hit, we were forced to quickly redeploy resources to emergency response, mitigating COVID risk through physical distance protocols and opening additional shelter space, testing and vaccination rollout, isolation centers. There was decreased capacity to engage, consult, and address aspects of coordinated access development and implementation of that which had been planned for 2020. Nevertheless, as aspects of coordinated access, common assessment, established referral processes, and HIFIS were already firmly in place prior to the pandemic, this facilitated coordination among our partners and allowed programs to roll out and achieve significant outcomes despite the pressures above. We now need to build on this momentum and this foundation to bring our system to the next level of integration. Next slide. Coordinated access is key to both enabling emergency response and in building the system we need to achieve our homelessness ending goals as a community. We know that we have the strategy we need to reduce homelessness. What we need now is recommitment and build community commitment around a shared vision and approach. This includes aligning our collective efforts to leverage existing resources as well as working together to secure new partnerships and support for additional housing resources. To get our system to the next level of integration, we need everyone rowing together in the same direction. We are working with our sector partners, who I've mentioned are incredibly stretched thin with responses throughout the pandemic, in order to formalize a coordinated access governance structure, as well as refocusing shared efforts around common intake and assessment to support new practices for matching people to appropriate housing resources. Over the next month, we will be rolling out a new model of prioritization aimed at reducing the bottleneck to get people out of shelters and encampments and into housing. Prioritization and criteria include 1 in 3 people will be Indigenous, 1 in 3 will be unsheltered, additional prioritization based on urgent health and safety, acuity, and chronicity. These renewed efforts at system integration through coordinated access will allow us to ensure optimal use of resources as a community and enable the collaboration necessary to respond quickly to emerging and ongoing pressures in the system. And then the final slide, I'm sure you've all been waiting. And I think this is an important representation of what we felt over the past 18 months. We know you've seen this before, though I can't overestimate its importance. So much of our attention and resources in the past 2 years have been directed to an emergency response, and for good reason. However, we cannot keep increasing the size and investment in emergency response alone. Hotel space is no longer available as it had been previously. Human resource capacity in emergency response is also limited. We need to focus on further investments in prevention and housing, not emergency shelter. This has been essential during the pandemic crisis. However, we look to move beyond crisis mode. We ask for your support in renewing and broadening community commitment to the homelessness strategy that we know can work. It's going to take all of us with increased effort and understanding, but absolutely we'll be able to achieve that. Thank you, and that brings me to the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Director John, for an incredible presentation and overview of the city's approach to adapting to the emergency and also transforming and moving us back into the long-term permanent solutions to address this issue and making it very clear what our goal is in terms of ending chronic homelessness by 2025. Thank you. That was very comprehensive. And Nadia, thank you in the background for moving those slides along. Councillor Clark, you are up first for questions to the presenters. Thanks.
Thank you, Chair Nan, and I agree with your statement in terms of the comprehensive approach that the staff have taken. This is excellent. So when I'm reading through the recommendations, and Mr. John would know this because I've been crunching the numbers and when we're dealing with the number of homeless and how many beds that we can get available, it looks to me that it's about 150 emergency beds total that would be created if committee and council approve this recommendation. Is that correct, or am I simplifying it?
Through the chair to the councillor, you are correct in a sense. I would create the nuance that the transfer of what's occurring at Cathedral, which is converting it to a women's system, is really addressing what we have experienced, unfortunately, for a long time, which is in the women's system, that true capacity pressure. So yes, that conversion allowing us to add 100 beds for prioritized for women will absolutely create some great flow through. I will say though that Cathedral still today is being used as a men's shelter. So we will be losing those beds in the men's system. However, we haven't operated it at that capacity. So this is an increased capacity. Typically, we don't have high capacities in Cathedral for men because of it being overflow. So while we're creating a net, I would say 128 beds through this process, we are able then through movement of individuals out of our hotel system to create overflow capacity should it be needed for men.
And so help me clarify this. We have overflow capacity at Cathedral for men. We're moving them out of there, and the 100 beds for women are going there. So where is the overflow capacity going to be found for the men that are being moved out of Cathedral?
So we will, sorry, through the chair to the council, we will be moving women from the 2 hotel overflow systems that we have. And one of those hotels then will be able to accommodate men. One of our hotels was originally, before we converted it to couples, was intended to be for men. We will return to that position and then be able to have that overflow. The report also speaks to 28 additional men's beds that we're able to create as well. So we're confident that this will readdress the imbalance that we've had when it comes to the different capacity challenges between the men and the women sectors.
Thank you. Also in the report with the recommendations, Chair Nan, it speaks to establishing a couple of funding sources for independent agencies and community entities who have an interest in supporting vulnerable residents through the winter months. It looks to me like it's about $1 million in total, excluding what is being invested in the YWCA. Is that?
Through the chair to the council, we've created an exclusive fund of 500,000, which is really to engage community partners, whether they're existing in drop-ins or whether they are new, such as churches and others. This is really to address, and I mentioned in my report, you know, we've had an expanded system. We have staffing challenges, and so this is really to mobilize other opportunities. I will say that since, and I know the report comes later in terms of our winter planning, we've had success in having some discussions as to what that will look like going forward, and we are confident that we will have many options when it comes to engaging those entities to help us with that winter planning process.
So I know, Chair Nan, that a number of faith groups have expressed concern for the homeless and have expressed an interest to assist where they can. So if faith groups want to house a couple of homeless individuals or unhoused family in their basement of their church as a temporary shelter, would that be permissible under this model?
Through the chair to the councillor, it would. In terms of creation, we are hoping that it is more of the kind of the warming centers through the winter months that it is operationalized. But absolutely, if there's an opportunity to house someone through that, we will review and certainly hope to support that as an option.
The other question I had was with respect to the capital renovations for the Good Shepherd Center with regards to the cathedral. So this is the things that the Good Shepherd Center has indicated to you or your staff that they need some assistance to do this work in the cathedral?
Through the chair to the council, that's correct. It is operating today as a men's shelter, but we recognize that the plant layout, particularly as we're maximizing capacity at that facility, requires some capital investment, not only to increase the capacity, but also to recognize that we are transitioning it to a women's shelter, which requires somewhat different plant orientation and layout. Ultimately, we're creating more privacy through partitions and other matters such as that.
And item D in the recommendation, Chair Nan, speaks to the hiring and retaining of a consultant to evaluate the feasibility of implementing a new Westminster bylaw with regards to renovictions. So, and I may have the wrong people here, staff, Chair Nan, to answer the question, but I'm going to try. I was under the impression that there were challenges with adopting the new Westminster bylaw if we did not have a multi-residential registry program. Can you speak to that, Mr. John, or should I reach out to Mr. Thorne?
So through the chair to the council, yeah, I can speak to it to the extent of my knowledge. And that was one piece that I was made aware of as we coordinated this framework that we wish to implement. There were some other Ontario Building Code issues. There were some other legislative pieces that what we intended to do was to retain a consultant who would really help us have a defensible framework. So if it is challenged, we have the necessary third-party support on that process. So there was more than just that I realize is going to be a challenge, but the intent of that fund for that consultant is to address matters such as that.
So when it says, and I apologize, Chair Nan, for taking up so much time, but when it says a consultant to evaluate the feasibility of implementing the new Westminster bylaw or style of bylaw, there would be some in the community that, and I think I would be with them, were having it evaluated and isn't really the issue. It's finding the ways and means to bring about a bylaw, perhaps made in Hamilton, but a bylaw on renovictions in Hamilton.
Through the chair to the council, sorry,
Yep.
That's exactly the intent, and I'll apologize if it's missed in translation, but we understand what we want to do. We want to hire a consultant to do it and make sure that when we do it, it stands as best a chance as possible for any challenges that may come. So that it is about implementation of that framework.
So then I would probably suggest at the appropriate time, Chair Nan, that we amend that item D and delete the phrase to evaluate the feasibility and insert to find the ways and means of implementing the new Westminster bylaw. And beyond that, I just want to say to Mr. John and the staff, this is a really comprehensive report. it is truly identifying the issues that we have on an emergency basis for this winter, to help ensure that the homeless are not on the streets and are not risk of exposure. But there are also things within these recommendations that will go a long way to the future in terms of perhaps preventing people from finding themselves without a home through no fault of their own. So I just wanted to make that comment, and I wanted to acknowledge and thank the staff for the incredible amount of work.
Sorry, I had myself on mute.
I'm not sure whose voice that was. Sorry, Councillor Clark. We were just interrupted there for a second.
No problem.
But
I just
we're good.
I want to ensure that the staff know how much I personally appreciate the amount of work that went into this and the amount of work that they're doing to really assist the homeless in our community. And it is really making a difference. And this will really help an awful lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackson, any questions on the report? Seeing none, then I'm going to ask you to assume the chair.
Okay, Councillor, floor is yours.
Thank you. Through you, can't echo enough the last comments that Councillor Clark made. Super biggest possible version that my words can muster at this time. Gratitude to the staff in housing services for not only picking up the mantle and running with it over the course of this entire pandemic and working nimbly to provide so many different emergency responses to the existing homelessness situation and crisis that we already had, then that which was deepened and widened by the pandemic and the physical limitations and the need to expand the system in order to maintain public health guidelines, then also respond to the growing number of people who, I think your report mentioned 200 plus unique individuals who've been added in to the system over the course of this pandemic. And now thinking about how to move out of these emergency responses back into a coordinated system that is able to respond and get us back on track towards that goal of ending chronic homelessness by 2025, which, yes, sounds very ambitious right now, and yet is a very clear commitment by our team and all of our housing partners whom we rely on to carry out this work. So again, thank you so much. That said, I do have a few clarifying questions that I'd like to get some responses on. So some of the nitty gritty in terms of the transition of shifting Cathedral Boys School into a temporary shelter exclusively for women. A few questions there, if I could. Director John, through you. One is this going to be supporting women exclusively, or will this also help address the need for shelter supports for non-binary and trans residents as well?
Director?
Through the chair to the council, that is the intent. We are still finalizing all of the supports that will be available through that process. And like I said, I think I've mentioned it several times, staffing is a considerable issue. It's not just finances right now. And I do want to impress that on everybody. This is a challenging circumstance that we've been planning almost 4 weeks ahead, 8 weeks ahead, and now we're 18 months ahead. So, there's only so much that people can give, but absolutely that is the intent, to ensure in that response that we are suitably addressing those factors.
Thank you. Through you, the report indicates that it will function, it says at approximate cost of $1 million for the period of January 1st to March 31st, 2022. Is there a possibility that the site would be decommissioned after March 31st from being a temporary shelter?
Through the chair to the councillor, so the use of the March date lines up with our existing funding. And so I don't want to misguide people to think that we are intending to decommission this on March. I mean, I would love to say yes. I would love to say that COVID is over and that we respond in a different way. But the reason March is in there because it lines up with our current COVID pressure funding. And as such, anything beyond March is currently unfunded and will become a budgetary discussion.
Okay. So it is purely financial, that timeline that's indicated in that section of the recommendations of the report.
Through the chair, that's correct.
Thank you. And through you to Director John, again, thank you to the team of Housing Services for hosting the meeting that took place this Monday to give the local Stinson community an opportunity to ask some questions and for staff to field some responses. And I know that that will be an ongoing effort, both on the part of staff, but also my office, to ensure that those questions from the community are responded to. One of the asks that came forward in that community session was an ability to open up a more regular dialogue between the community and the operator of the shelter to not only address emerging issues, but there's a lot of folks in the community who want to be able to support it as well. So from that point, I would appreciate being able to work with staff, understanding that this is a very intense time with a lot of pressures. So aiming for a February community meeting is what I'm hoping to do, and would appreciate coordinating with your division to make that happen.
Through the chair to the councillor, absolutely. We recognize that the community are with us in this response and that they are an integral part, and it does have impacts beyond just some of those interventions. And I believe February would be a perfect date, as we are anticipating as soon as we can opening up in January this facility. So we'll at least have given it some operating time for us to maybe course correct if necessary.
Excellent, thank you. And then away from that specific recommendation and towards the by name list. So it looks like the total increase of beds in the women's shelter, does it coincide? It's specifically based on the by name list, or is it the by names list and the HIFIS list? And do those two lists capture the total experience of homelessness, or are there some individuals that remain unknown in the system because they haven't yet accessed the system?
So through the chair to the councillor, I would absolutely say there are many unknowns. And when we speak about the women's sector, we hear often about that factor of unknown women's homelessness. What we have seen through the pandemic, I want to turn this into a positive, but we have got great data in terms of what we are understanding about that impact, which before wasn't quantifiable, but I'm absolutely positive there's still unquantifiable pieces that we need to make sure we create the space for those individuals to use, which may not be always shown in the data that we have, but we are now ensuring through drop-ins and through others the shared use of that data. So it really is helping us inform our response.
Okay, so through you, as people come into the drop-in centers, and would that also include the drop-ins that we're expanding to through the winter servicing model? I know that's a separate report, but through the winter servicing plan and what you mentioned in response to Councillor Clark, the goal of increasing the amount of spaces available through community partners, would those also have an intake process that would enable us to gather more accurate data in terms of the number of people who are experiencing homelessness in the city right now?
So through the chair to the council, yes, through our funded drop-ins, we have through varying degrees successfully had the HIFIS set up. I will look to my colleagues if I'm misspeaking, but it's varying degrees. We are making sure that the information that we get is as good as we can get, but recognizing particularly with drop-ins the nature of that interaction, and it's somewhat different to that of admissions into a shelter. So the amount of information does vary, but it does provide us, particularly on just the by name list, an understanding of who is accessing services, how frequently, and where they are in the system.
Okay, thank you for that. And it does really come through in this report that there is an increase in our city's ability to respond to the specific needs of the women's system and the Indigenous community in terms of ongoing investments and increased investment. So I'm really appreciative of seeing those, as those have been chronic issues that the system has been trying to respond to. And I know that it's been a lot of effort on the part of staff to make sure that there's collaboration and coordination there. In terms of the violence against women's shelters that are funded by the province, they're not currently participating in that by name list. And I wonder, and I don't want to spend too much time at emergency community services on this one, and I do wonder if this might be a better and a more appropriate conversation at that subcommittee that is supposed to be focusing on supports for women, non-binary and trans residents who are experiencing homelessness. So I'm just going to pause there for a quick second through you to chair to Elsie Bates. Is that committee scheduled to meet again in 2022, or is it just at the call of the chair? Is that the call of the chair? Okay, so I will follow up with Elsie Bates on that one through you and the chair. So we'll move some of these conversations over there. And final question to you through you is the cathedral shelter. Sorry, you had mentioned that the beds transitioning from the men's system will be made up by a hotel a hotel option that is going to come online to function in that overflow capacity plus the 28 additional beds through these recommendations that are before committee. How many beds are in the hotel system that would be then available for the overflow for the men's?
So through the chair and to the councillor, and we're always trying to be nimble, but in terms of the one hotel that accommodates men, I'm sure one of my staff will jump on if I'm incorrect, there's 101 rooms.
Okay, significant. Thank you. And then final question is related to your first slide image that was mentioned in terms of the unfortunate need to close the couples shelter. I may have missed it and I apologize, Director, through you because of the phone call that I got from the school. But how are we going to accommodate the needs of those individuals who were otherwise accessing the couple shelter? Is what's before us today able to provide the number of beds, understanding that it means that those couples will have to separate in order to access the system as it is gender divided?
Through the chair to the councillor, so the pressures in the men's systems are less, and then with the prioritization of space, hotel, and then as soon as we get online, the conversion of cathedral will address the pressure that we have in the women's system. So it's not suggested or indicated that there will be a pressure as a result of us not being able to accommodate any additional couples. We will continue to monitor that, however, just to ensure that. And when it comes to the service that couples receive, this is only in the expanded shelter provision at the hotel. So, you know, if you're a couple accessing, dropping in other services, they will be maintained and their ability to be housed and supported as a couple are not being affected by that decision.
Okay. And through you, how many couples were accommodated in that shelter? And understanding that it's a ranging population.
So through the chair to the councillor, there was approximately 36 couples. Those couples remain. We have paused for additional admissions, and we will work in order to, whether it is housing or other options for the balance of those couples.
Okay, thank you. Those are my questions for now.
Chair, back to you, Councillor Nan.
Really looking forward to ending being chair so that I can take a break in between asking questions and resuming chair. Thank you. Colleagues, any other questions? Oh, Councillor Clark for a second time, please go ahead. There's my break.
Thank you, Chair Nan. Two follow-up questions. I apologize. I said I only had one. There were 2 fires in the Stony Creek area that were in seniors apartment buildings. One was Paramount Place and one was Stony Brook, which is down below. It's not in my ward. It's in Councillor Powers' ward. Can I understand, or do you let me know whether or not, or what we have done to assist those displaced residents who found themselves without a place after the fire? How do we help them find the appropriate housing while they're waiting for the unit to be rebuilt? Because they're still working on those units, so it's going to be a bit longer.
So through the chair to the council, I do see that my manager of the social housing portfolio is here, Brian Krebs. So I may ask Brian to assist on that one, as he has been working with that particular project and operator.
There he is, Mr. Cripps. How are you?
I'm well. So
Good.
through the chair, in a situation like the one that was experienced at Stony Brook, we work with the provider. It's ultimately the provider's responsibility to ensure that everybody's accommodated. In part, that is because they are working through their insurance and the tenant's insurance. But in terms of support, we worked with other housing providers, including Niagara Regional Housing, to look at available units that people could move into, and a number of people moved into other units temporarily or permanently. People were offered a number of different options. Some people who had insurance opted to stay in hotels rather than to move a couple of times. Some people opted to move in with family rather than to move into a temporary unit.
But to be clear, we have accommodated them to the best of our abilities as a municipality.
Yes, our understanding is that everybody has been accommodated with housing for the time that they need to be out of their units.
Thank you. And my second question would be, thank you for that, Mr. Kripp, Madam Chair. My second question would, I guess, go back to the director. I'm trying to understand, and I haven't been able to figure this one out, who is responsible for inspecting emergency shelters? We've heard a number of anecdotes this year about treatment in said facilities, violence in these facilities, theft, et cetera, et cetera. What role does the city of Hamilton have in inspecting emergency shelters and to ensure that they are compliant with our policies?
Through the chair to the councillor. So in terms of our shelter system, we do block fund them, and we do have contractual obligations which speak to expectations and delivery of service. That being said, we do recognize that some of our other municipalities have created more formal guidelines in terms of that process and shelter standards, for want of a better term. We are currently working on that as a response. In the meantime, I'm not sure if there are, and I'll look to my staff, any oversight bodies, but we do have the ability through our contractual obligations to speak to those issues when they come up. But ultimately, it is a block funded service that we retain through our provincial funding.
So, Chair Nan, is there anyone that can advise, are there inspections that are occurring, or it's just on a complete basis and you use the contract? I mean, given some of the things that we've heard, Mr. John, it concerns me that we hear continually that there is violence, theft, abuse in the shelters. And I would assume that the obligation would be on the shelter provider to have a safe, clean shelter, warm food, all of the amenities that we expect them to have. And so who inspects them to ensure that they're doing that and not just taking the money and ignoring the residents?
So through the chair to the councillor, certainly we have staff that under normal practice visit. We always investigate concerns when they're raised and review that when it's acts of violence or police are called. So there isn't as if there is no follow-up on those pieces, as well as we have the fallback of contractual obligations if we continue to see issues that are not reconciled or addressed appropriately.
Thank you, Chair Nan. So I think what I'll do is I'll just take that offline with Mr. John and see if we can create formal policies. If we're giving this kind of money to emergency shelters, then I think it's important that we follow up and to make sure that the money is actually going to the care that we're sending the money over there for. So I think we need that. I'm happy to move my amendment, but I believe we're in presentations and I don't know when I would move that amendment. So if you could let me know, Madam Chair, I'd be happy to do it at the appropriate time.
Certainly, Councillor. We will move to receive this presentation first, and then we will move to put the report on the floor, at which point you will bring forward your amendment. Oh, my apologies. So say that again, Elsie Bates, if you could just take the mic and
certainly through you, Madam Chair. The delegations who are here are speaking. We have some delegations speaking to that report. So we will, if the committee wishes to hear those delegations first before considering the report, then we'll defer the report to after the delegations. That said, I do not see any of those delegates in the meeting at the moment, so we'll cross that bridge when we get to it.
Okay, thank you for that clarity. So we'll receive this presentation first, move to delegations. And before we move to delegations, we'll defer the report to after delegations. And then after delegations, we'll move to put the report on the floor, at which point you can bring forward your amendment. Good, Councillor Clark? Great. Okay, so we already had a mover and a seconder for the presentation. No, okay, moved by Councillor Marula, seconded by Councillor Clark to receive the presentation. And again, thanks to the staff team for putting so much effort into such a detailed report. Duly moved and seconded, should be before you electronically for vote in a moment. Carries, and now we will defer the discussion of the report until after delegation. May I please have a mover and seconder for deferral? Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jackson. And it's electronically. And that carries as well. So moving on to item 9, which is delegations, and thank you to the delegates for bearing with us and waiting until those presentations were complete. Before we begin, members are reminded that questions of the delegates are for clarification purposes only and not for debate. We'll hear virtual delegations first and then hear video delegations. Up first is 9.1, Cameron Croach and Rebecca Banke from the LGBTQ Advisory Committee, respecting appointment of additional members to the LGBTQ Advisory Committee. I'd call on Cameron and Rebecca to please turn on your cameras and unmute your microphones. You have 5 minutes.
Thanks. We're back again. We're here to speak to specifically to recommendation. I'm going to share it on the screen. It'll make it a little easier, I think, to follow along. You have a copy, but there's a particular point I think it's worth looking at. Just give me a moment here. I'm going to speak to this part of it, and then Rebecca will speak to the next part of it. The recommendation is pretty straightforward. We're asking that the interview subcommittee for the Emergency and Community Services Committee select 2 additional members to sit on the LGBTQ Advisory Committee. Our asks are that we have the same focus as the last time we did this. We're aware of 2 procedural issues with this, just so you know that up front. Procedural issue number 1 is that you've already ruled that you're not going to involve members of the LGBTQ Advisory Committee in this selection process. Like, council's already ruled on that. Despite that, that's our recommendation. Take it or leave it. Like, that's what we're putting forward here. And secondly, there's a stipulation on the record right now that says that a year, if the appointment, sorry, let me think again how to phrase this. If the council term is less than a year left in the council term, then the appointment process can't happen. And I guess I wanted to flag this because you do have the option to make this change through council if you wish, in order to grant this request. That the advisory committee first started its term in the middle of May of 2019. It doesn't actually coincide with council's term. So you currently have a rule in the books that says, if it's with in a year of the end of council's term, then, we're not going to appoint new members. However, members, if on the same schedule as last time, wouldn't be appointed until May 15th, 2023. So that's a year and a half away from now. And so we are missing 2 members right now. One resigned, one is on leave. So we'd like to have 2 more members for the next year and a half of the committee, which is a significant portion of our term. So we understand there's a rule in the books right now that says you can't do that. Our recommendation is we want you to anyways. And Rebecca will speak briefly to why that is.
Thanks, Cameron. We talked a little bit about this in the presentation, but there's something kind of beautiful and galvanizing about new voices being added to this conversation. One, it diversifies the kind of perspective we get to bring and lets us more effectively give advice based on the community we represent and not monolithically based only on our perspectives. Also, engaged members, how should I put this gently? This can sometimes be fatiguing work. And while the voices of experience on our advisory committee have been doing this for some time, are invaluable to people like me who are coming with a lot of enthusiasm, but without maybe a lot of expertise, it's also really important that we bring new enthusiastic participants to the conversation. And losing out on the opportunity to do that feels like a real loss. It feels like it will be harder to bring excited perspective, and it feels like there will be less opportunity to be effective in what we're doing. And it potentially challenges our ability to continue to maintain the engaged quorum that has been such a big part of our success so far. I don't want to belabor this point endlessly. I know this might not be possible, but we would be really grateful if you could see a way to finding a method of helping us continue to do this kind of work, because I think when more voices are a part of the conversation, you get better advice. I think the citizen committee reports we put together are more meaningful and more effective to you if we bring perspective. I've often sat in advisory committee meetings certain that I knew the answer to something and ready to advocate passionately for it, only to hear a different perspective and to change my mind, to get a new understanding, or to have a perspective that I don't have brought to my attention in a way that really illuminates things. I want to continue to have a more nuanced and a more diverse perspective. And I think volunteers have to step away from this project sometimes, and that meaning that our committee has to be so much smaller for such a significant period of our term seems like an unfortunate regret.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Is the delegation complete? Moving to questions, Councillor Clark, and then Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair Nan. Do we know if there are, the last time we looked at this, we had a list of applicants who had applied, for whatever reason wasn't chosen. So then we went back to that pool of applicants. Do we know if there's still remaining a pool of applicants, or would we need to find new blood? Maybe the clerk can answer. I'm not sure. Someone might know.
I think it would be clerks that would have that data. I'm not sure that the selection committee and this committee coincide with clerk information, but Tamara?
Yeah, so it would have been the subcommittee that to select members. I can't remember the name of the subcommittee, but from AFNA that made those decisions.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the answer about whether or not there is a pool of members existing, but if I can clarify at this time through the chair that the legislation is in the Municipal Act, that is within 12 months, not of the end of council's term, but within 12 months of a municipal election, that new members cannot be appointed to any committee of council.
I did not know that. I guess that's our answer. Sorry, folks. Thank you for that, Madam Clerk.
Thank you. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Nan. I didn't get a chance to thank Chair Crouch and incoming Chair Banky for your earlier annual report card and presentation to this new standing committee that I'm pleased you're reporting to. If I could just give a little historical context, what Chair Crouch says about what seems to be now by May, of the new term of council. What's happened over many, many years, Chair Nan, is that after the municipal election, when the new council came in, there was hope that all the advisory committees with advertisements could be appointed by end of January, February, many years ago. And what happened was that, of course, coincides with an extraordinarily busy time for the new council, primarily with the first budget of the new council term. And I recall many council colleagues of the past, we just didn't have enough time in our day to do the interviews we wanted to do. Hence, it extended and elongated the appointment process to what ended up being in spring and then late spring. So just to provide some historical context, how that has occurred. And so so the result of that, though, to Chair Croach and incoming Chair Banky, the result of that has been the last few terms of council, the advisory committee appointees have still, if you will, gotten a 4-year term of appointment, because now it's literally gone to April of the new year of the new term of council. So more or less, they've gotten their 4 years of service and wonderful volunteer participation in. So that's number one, just to provide some context there. And number two, Chair Nan, you and I, through this committee at the beginning of this term, we sat on the interview subcommittee from the homelessness advisory, I believe, for the seniors, for the veterans. Of course, the LGBTQ was formerly under AFNA. So if I recall correctly, a staff resource person to those advisory committees was always available to provide some background information and or some possible assistance. But I don't recall any current member of the advisory committee sitting at the interview table, but I stand to be corrected on that, if that just provides some consistency for Chair Croach and incoming Chair Banky. As far as the last point, you know what, maybe it's time to kind of relook that policy so that we're consistent. After all, Chair Nan, we just appointed a new member of council who will have less than a year to serve on this term of council. So you know what, that might be a conversation what council should have again about revisiting that policy of we can't appoint with less than 12 months to go to the election time. Thank you, Chair, and I hope that provided some additional information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. So in terms of your last comment there of the review of a policy and Elsie Bates clarifying it's not necessarily a policy, it's the municipal act requirement. So there is some clarity of information that is required. The question that your last comment leaves me with, and I realize I'm in chair, but maybe I'll just pass it over to you.
No, carry on, please. You're using my thought. Please carry on.
I am using your thought, but just trying to get some clarity around procedure, because the last comment you asked and the information of clarity is that it's the municipal act that says within 12 months of a municipal election, there can be no appointments. Yet your comment is that it's a City of Hamilton policy. So wouldn't those two things need to be linked?
I would think so, but maybe Elsie Bates could provide further clarity, and maybe this is a conversation we could bump up at the council level in some way or some fashion eventually, even to explore city policy versus the municipal act, Chair Nan. I'll leave the rest with you. Thank you.
Thank you.
My understanding, sorry, through the chair, Councillor Jackson, is that and it's sorry to Mara Bates from Clerks, that it is the municipal election that directs us on that, and that our policies are follow that. So if we were to change that, we would be in violation of the Municipal Act as well. It's certainly something I can take back and find some more clarity on that that I can provide offline.
Okay. I'm seeing nodding of heads and thumbs up. So do we need that in the form of formal direction, or is that's assumed direction? Okay, there we go. Councillor Wilson, welcome as a guest to the Emergency Community Services Committee. You are next on the speakers list.
Thank you, Chair Dan. I was a participant in the interviews for the last time the committee was able to add some members, and the point might be mute, but just for your information, that there are additional persons that the advisory committee could draw from. If I could, through you, just ask a question because I was late in hearing. Did I hear Elsie Bates say that it falls under the Municipal Act because the advisory committee is a committee of council? Is that the ruling?
Yes, Councillor Wilson, through the chair, the Municipal Act does have that stipulation about the moratorium, if you would, on new members within that 12 months of a municipal election, and it specifies all members of council, subcommittee, standing committees, subcommittees, and advisory committees of council.
Okay, I think I'll have to take my question on that matter offline. Thank you.
Any other speakers? Seeing none, thank you, Cameron, and thank you, Rebecca, for your delegation and for bringing forward committee's request. Moving on to 9.5 is, oh, sorry, my apologies, 9.4 is Darlene Wesley from Hamilton Acorn, respecting the Renovations policy in item 8.2. Darlene, are you present? Okay, not seeing Darlene in the WebEx portal right now. If you are able to, or a friend of yours is able to ensure that you can get on, or if you need any help, please do reach out. We'll move forward on the list of delegates, and I'll come back and call your name at the end. 9.5 is Zachary Hawkridge from Acorn Hamilton, respecting Renoviction. Zachary, are you here? Zachariah? Calling Zachariah Hawkridge one more time. I don't see the name in WebEx either. So we'll do the same. Maybe they had connection issues, I'm not sure, but we'll come back and check at the end. 9.6 is Christine Jewers, also from Acorn, respecting Renovictions. Staying here. Also not in the WebEx meeting. Okay, and we'll move forward to 9.7, who is Marcy McLevine, respecting the couple shelter. Marcy, are you still on the line? We may have lost Marcy as well. Okay, moving on to the next delegate, Douglas Sporbeck from Hamilton Acorn, respecting Renovictions, is a video delegation. So we will be able to see that.
No, hold on. Hello.
Oh, wrong video. Just a second, folks.
Through the chair, yes, my apologies. That is not the correct video for Douglas Sporbeck. Bear with me for a moment. May I ask that we move to Elizabeth Ellis, and then we'll get the correct video.
Certainly, no problem. We'll move on to Elizabeth Ellis from Acorn Hamilton, respecting Renovictions. This is a video delegation as well. We'll go there and then we'll cycle back through.
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Ellis, and I'm a co-chair for East End Chapter of Acorn in Ward 4. Today I'm delegating to you. I'm in favor of finding a consultant to do the renovation policies, to look over it, because we need this very much. Landlords don't need to be throwing people out on the street. There's so many people homeless because of these renovations. And I thank you for listening to me.
Okay, so that was Elizabeth Ellis. So we'll move backwards now to Douglas Borbeck. Also a video delegation. Hang tight for a minute. Just loading.
Hello, City Councilors and City staff. My name is Doug Sporbeck, and I am a member of Acorn Hamilton Mountain Chapter. I am delegating today in support of the city taking the next step to protect tenants from evictions. I'm a tenant living in a housing complex on the mountain in Ward 8. Recently, our landlord has given us all a letter stating for us to move. The letter also states that they have sold the property to someone who wishes to demolish our homes. They haven't filed for a building permit or given us any proof that the property has been sold. For all we know, the new owners may wish to renovate our homes and rent them out at double the price. Our landlord has been harassing tenants regularly. He has been knocking on doors, calling us and telling us that we have to leave. He also has even been refusing our rent. I am concerned that you will fall against us at the landlord-tenant board for failure of payment of rent. Many of the families living here have been over 10 years. I have lived here for almost 20 years. These are middle-class families. Many of us have nowhere else to go and can't afford what's on the market now. We need to protect families from displacement and protect Hamilton's market of affordable single-family housing from being destroyed. Thank you for listening to my delegation.
Thank you to Elizabeth and Doug for submitting your video delegations. Just cycling back, were we able to confirm whether the previous delegates that were named submitted pre-recorded videos or?
Through you, Madam Chair, the remaining delegates from Acorn submitted delegation requests with no indication that they were videos, and no videos were received. So my assumption was that they were intending to be here. They were sent invitations to the WebEx and instructions on how to join and when to join, and I did not hear anything from them.
Okay. All right, thank you. So going backwards then, the only other delegate that wasn't in that batch then would have been Marcy McLevin, respecting couples shelters. And Marcy, are you online? Okay. Okay, so there may have been something else that came up for Marcy. She was online earlier. She had to leave, perhaps. In this case now, if we could please have a mover and seconder to receive the delegations that we did receive out of those that were listed between 9.1 and 9.7. 9.1, 9.2, and 9.3. Moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Clark to receive those delegations. The vote is up. No, it's not. I lied. It's coming up. And that carries. Thank you. One abstention due to the declared conflict of interest earlier. Moving forward, then we're coming back to the report, item 8.2, Adaptation Transformation of Services for People Experiencing Homelessness update. Now to move and second the report to put it on the table. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jackson. And Councillor Clark, you had an amendment to the report.
Thank you, Chair Nan. My amendment is to item number D, and I move that we delete the words "to evaluate the feasibility" and insert the words "to find the ways and means." And please don't have staff take my amendment as a disparagement. I understand their intent. This just clarifies it much. Our expectation is we are going to do this as opposed to looking at it. Thank
Correct. You. And as I recall the motion that was previously ratified by council, that was the direction we were headed in. Elsie Bates, any you were indicating?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair. I think we first procedurally we first want to lift. You want to vote to lift subsection D from the recommendations to make that amendment and to accommodate Councillor Marula's conflict. So first, we'll need a vote to lift item D, then the amendment, and then we'll vote on the balance of the report.
You got it. So as she said, that's what we're gonna do. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Jackson.
I may need some clarity on this. Sorry.
Oh, we're just lifting the item, Councillor Marula, so you can vote to abstain as
Okay,
previously declared. This is that section of the agenda.
Thank you.
No worries. That carries. So now we can receive your amendment. Moved by Councillor Clark. I'm happy to second it. And the amendment, did you get the language, folks?
Did I need to repeat it, or are we good?
I'm just waiting for confirmation. Thank you, Councillor Clark.
Mm-hmm. My pleasure.
I do not have it written down, so if you could repeat it, Councillor Clark.
Absolutely. I did send it to you by email. It's to amend item D by deleting the words "to evaluate the feasibility" and insert the words "to find the ways and means."
All right, here we are.
There it is.
Just waiting for Councillor Marula.
And he'll be abstaining on this one as it's still the same item.
Yes. Okay, perfect. And that carries.
Okay. And so now it's amended. we need to go back and vote on it as amended? In which case, is Councillor Marula in the clear? Does he have to abstain from the accepting the entire motion? The entire? Oh, D as amended is all that we're doing right now. Got it. Fair. Perfect. Right, as amended for item D. Thank you. That carries, and now we go back to the original report and approve the remainder of the recommendations that are there. Moved by Councillor Clark, happy to second it. And Councillor Marula, the item that you had a conflict is pulled out of this, so you can proceed with your vote on this, the remainder of 8.2. It's still loading, folks. There it is. And carried. Thank you. Moving on to item 10, discussion 10.1 is the ZOL defibrillator standardization for the Hamilton Fire Department and Hamilton Paramedic Services, report HSC 21039. I'd like to call upon Chief Michael Sanderson, Director of our Hamilton Paramedic Services, to please introduce this item. Chief, I see your camera's already on. You can unmute yourself. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, back in December of 2012, Council approved the standardization of the Zoll Medical Corporation electrocardiogram monitors, defibrillators, and the semi-automatic public access defibrillators, what we refer to as AEDs, for the paramedic service, for the Hamilton Fire Department, and for our public access defibrillator program. Just for clarity in this report, the entire title of the 2012 report was included on the current report. But the current report deals only with the planned 2022 purchase of cardiac monitor defibrillators for the paramedic service. There is no purchase related to the Hamilton Fire Department in this report. The council authorization of the day did not have an expiry date, and your paramedic service continues to procure equipment based upon that authority. Over the last several years, we've extended the life cycle of the Zoll X-Series cardiac monitor defibrillators that were purchased in 2012 for paramedic services to the extent possible to ensure sufficient capital equipment reserves are in place for their full replacement. We extended the life cycle of our defibrillators by just over 2 years in order to achieve that. While some advancements have been made on the Zoll X-Series monitor, particularly in the diagnostics and the applicability to current research, the proposed replacement unit is an updated version of the originally procured unit that our staff are already trained on, that links well to the other devices such as the auto pulse devices and our electronic patient care report technology, and for which we have maintenance systems and capacity already in place. The new technology in the defibrillators includes such items as bag valve mask or BVM ventilation feedback to ensure the right ventilations of ventilation for the patient who's not breathing, not too much ventilation and not too little. This change has been demonstrated to improve patient outcomes, particularly in cardiac arrests. It also provides traumatic brain injury or TBI monitoring, which will improve the ability of our paramedics to determine patient deterioration while en route to the hospital. The RescueNet Live Edition will better enable a telehealth solution linking real-life patient electrocardiogram data to the interventional physicians in the cardiac catheterization lab. And of course, there's an improved case review process to improve our ability for quality assurance and quality improvement. The purpose of this report is to make committee and to make council aware that the paramedic service plans to proceed on the procurement of the updated Zoll X-Series devices based upon the existing standardization and authorization and the funding allocated in our existing capital equipment reserves for this purpose, subject of course to council approving the capital expenditures for 2022 as already recommended by the General Issues Committee. And that would be my introduction to it, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Chief. May I please have a mover and seconder to put the report or the discussion item on the agenda, and then any moved by Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Marula. Any questions? Seeing none, then we will have our electronic vote, please. Thank you again, Chief. We just need Councillor Clark's vote with a thumbs up. Confirmation. And that carries. Moving on. 10.2, this is the Snow Angels Program Update Report HSC 21046, deferred from last committee. Any discussion on this? Yes, Councillor Jackson.
Thank you, Chair Nan. And one of the many projects and programs and services that will be part of Councillor Sam Marula's legacy is introducing the Snow Angels program, approximately, I'm going to guess, about 15 years ago or so. And before I get to a couple of questions of staff, one of the reasons why I've continued, Chair Nan, to support this very unique program to the City of Hamilton and the province of Ontario is, in spite of some challenges to match the number on our wait list over the years with volunteers, I want to read you recently what has just been received in the last few days to General Manager Grace Mader and Managers Ricky Frith and Manager Jennifer Hohall from a longtime client of our Snow Angels program. Quote, I want to take a moment to follow up on your response with my immense gratitude for Nancy and her son. Those are the volunteers in the Snow Angels program for this particular senior client, returning as my Snow Angels once again this year. I am not embarrassed to say, Chair Nan, that I broke out in tears of relief when I received your email. I know I do let you know every year how grateful I am for this service as one who has no relatives and who does not know how I would function. The pandemic has made my disability even more severe and things more isolating. But for the very rare occasion I may go out, such as to the hospital for an appointment to get my third dose, or library to pick up my materials, or just the assurance to know I won't receive a ticket from the city, knowing my Snow Angels will be here brings such a relief. I would also like to once again say thank you to you and all your staff for the work you do to find and match this service. May you be aware it is never ever taken for granted, unquote. You know, for the approximate 100 some odd seniors that have been matched and will be matched going into this season with roughly 100 volunteers based on this report 10.2, Chair Nan, I'm delighted. Obviously, there's about 100 more on our wait list. And over the years, there's been up to about 500 maximum at our peak time of seniors and those with disabilities across our city that need this valuable program so that they don't have to leave their homes and do not have to be institutionalized. So with all that said, in a favorable way and a thankful way, I have a couple of questions to General Manager Mader, and if she wants to delegate it to Managers Frith or Hohall, that's fine. Two quick things. At the bottom of page 2 of the report, it says this year's program will benefit from a newly designed digital database tailored to the Snow Angels program. Can one of the staff explain, please, hopefully, what benefits that will accrue? Through you, Chair Nan.
Certainly. Go ahead, General Manager Mader.
Good afternoon, Grace Mader, General Manager, Healthy and Safe Communities. And I am going to delegate that response over to Jen. She can explain it much better than I. Thank you.
Break down that digital stuff. Come on. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Jen Hohall, Manager in the General Manager's Office of Healthy and Safe Communities. So what that's referring to is a new database that was created with the support of our information technology team at the city. And what it'll allow us to do is actually digitally map where volunteers are and where Snow Angel clients are so that we will be able to match people based on their location much quicker. We know that with this program, ideally volunteers tend to like to stay and volunteer in their own neighborhood. So again, this will let us see where we're missing volunteers and where we need to target some of that communication and advertising, and where the matches can be made really quickly. So it should help us out.
That's great, Manager. And just a supplementary question to you, again, to the approximate 100 or so that are on the wait list, hoping God's willing to be matched this year with the winter pending. are we working on collaborations with other possible winter assistance providers in the community, either not-for-profits, possibly at very minimal expense, private operators? If we can't match from the municipality, are we working in collaboration with others so that seniors and those with disabilities are being matched in some way, somehow? Through you, Chair Nan, please.
Through the counselor, we do when a senior calls, we don't want to leave them without any options. So we do our best to help them through what some of their other options are and where they can find other alternative solutions to the Snow Angels program. Internally this year, we're going to take a look at doing some work in terms of if we can establish some rosters potentially of service providers that may be helpful, or even just provide some more information either on the phone or electronically about where seniors and their families can find this information, because sometimes it is difficult for a senior or their family who may not live in the city to find this information for them.
Thank you, Manager Hohal. And a closing comment, General Manager Mader. It's been 15 years, but I am still waiting for that year when you and staff say, Counselor, there's not a single person left on the wait list. All X number have been fully matched, and we've got a perfectly serviced program. Thank you very much, Chair Nan.
Thank you. And thank you, staff, for your responses. So it's been duly moved and seconded. We have no other speakers at this time, so it's before you electronically. And that carries. Thank you. Moving on to item 10.2021 to 2022 winter service planning for those folks experiencing, I thought it was, yep. The title is truncated, sorry, and the report is HSC 21048, deferred from the November 18th meeting. Colleagues, any questions to the report? Seeing none of my colleagues, I will pass the chair to Councillor Jackson, as I do have a few questions on this one.
Carry on, Councillor.
Thank you. So through you to staff. Overall, thank you for the report and the quick turnaround. I know that we moved it. I think it was just a matter of a couple of weeks before staff turned around the report and brought it back. And then we had to defer the item to this one due to loss of quorum. So some of my questions may have been already integrated through your actions and planning and ongoing work, as this report is much more general, maybe because of the time by which it was submitted to the agenda. So I did want to ask if we could get a little bit more detail as a committee now, given that winter is a matter of, 11 days away. So through you, how many drop-in locations can we anticipate for this winter?
Director John, please.
Through the chair to the councillor, Director Edward John, Director of Housing Services. Apologies, it's been a day. So in terms of existing drop-ins, so we have 4 in total funded through the city. I can go through them. It's Living Rock, youth focused. We have Carol Ann's Place, which is women focused. Willow's Place, which is missing services, and that is 2 women focused, and then Wesley Day Center. I can give an update though, since that report was last written, because it was deferred, and obviously we continued discussion. So I am happy to say that we have been able to secure, which I think was a salient point coming forward, as overnight, something which we didn't have before, overnight drop-in. So at this point, while we're still refining some of the process, we have secured overnight drop-in for all cold weather alerts for as long as they are in action. And then coming January, we will have that drop-in available at least twice a week. Operationally, we're looking at how best to serve the population, which gives that overnight drop-in. And I do want to emphasize that for some of those unsheltered individuals, for whatever reasons are not accessing shelter, this is low barrier, a drop-in, so it doesn't provide the same range of services, but does give that respite and certainly gives that opportunity for those that, for whatever reason, are unable to access the shelter system. The other update, which I will confirm, and we're in close to finalizing some discussions, is with an Indigenous-led drop-in. Another aspect that we haven't had in our overview. We're in the final discussions of securing that for 3 months over the winter, and obviously looking for the longevity and sustainability of that going forward. But we will be able to use some of those funds approved today, if we can finalize that, to have then an Indigenous-led, Indigenous-focused drop-in.
Thank you, and that's great news, and not a surprise given the number of weeks that have passed since the original report was written. Through you to Director John, that separate Indigenous-led drop-in, will that one also be 24 hours, or is that going to be operating on a different timeline? Is it anticipated to be 24 hours?
Through the chair to the councillor, it's not right now.
Okay.
We will explore whatever options we can to extend those hours. I go back to the staffing issue and any logistics that may occur, and it's rapidly evolving, but certainly we'll be open to those discussions.
Thank you. And through you, in your definition of low barrier, what's the standard defined definition of low barrier? And then what is the access in terms of making sure that it's as accessible and easy as possible for folks to get to?
So through the chair to the councillor, I may look to my colleagues. We don't necessarily have an explicit definition of low barrier, but as I mentioned before, some of those limiting factors that may prevent individuals accessing other services such as shelters, the low barrier option does present that self for those drop-ins. For instance, things like they will often allow pets if they're service animals. They also have coordination with animal services because pets often are one of those limiting factors. But like I say, there are no standards when it comes to low barrier and what supports they provide. It's more for the access into those services. They do coordinate, however, aspects such as harm reduction services, which are then provided through programs like HemSmart and the Shelter Health Network.
Thank you. And on the pets comment, so there would be permissible if they are deemed service animals. Is my understanding for many folks who do have their pets and whom have no home and are living outdoors currently, that they're not necessarily service animals, that these are their therapy pets, but not in a formalized, recognized way. So when you're saying, Director John, that you're going to be working with animal services on this one, is it to be able to enable those unhoused residents who have pets?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, it's to assuage some of that concern when you do have, essentially the owner not being able to continue to be with the pet, to make sure we provide obviously connection through animal services. There's still a process to go through, and like I say, I don't want to take away from the creative problem solving that also occurs, whether it's at the drop-ins or the shelters, to deal with that issue. But it shouldn't be understated that we recognize that, say, therapy pet, but there can also be levels of trauma associated with having to leave one's pet.
To separate, yeah. Okay. Through you, will these drop-in centers also be able to coordinate additional supports, i.e. working with those partners who will be providing these respite centers regarding winter gear, coats, mitts, scarves, hats, blankets, etc.?
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, that's correct. Like, we don't have a standard form of response within all the drop-ins, but the clothing, food, all those aspects will be coordinated depending on how each individual drop-in operates. But certainly, many of those needs and must-haves are coordinated at that point.
And through you, how will we be communicating the availability of these additional drop-in centers to those who are houseless right now?
So through the chair to the councillor, part of the report speaks to this kind of coordinated cheat sheet, should get a better term, but it will be a means to which individuals can understand exactly what's available and when available, and we will ensure our street outreach have this. We will post it on the website. We will work with our partners and agencies to share that type of information so that it is coordinated but be easily accessible as to when those options are available.
Excellent. And then finally, is there an evaluation or monitoring process built in? You often do. I know you often do course correct and continue to evolve the services that are being made to meet the need. I know that was certainly the case last winter, but I just wanted to hear that in terms of a formal process for this as well, given it is a service plan.
Through the chair to the councillor, yes, we do. Like I said, we've had the opportunity through the funded programs and the funded drop-ins, which we typically do not provide in our shelter system, the ability to ensure data is collected, and then obviously use that data, evaluate that data, and recognize where we can improve and consolidate and coordinate better responses.
Excellent. And final question through you. Is it possible to post once the information is finalized and coordinated, to post it on our city's website, as made clear not only through yesterday's GIC meeting, but multiple other delegations of various other standing committees, including this one? We've heard about, neighbors who aren't necessarily part of any organization, who might, I've met a few when I'm outside at our community parks. There was this one individual, Lily, who showed up with her son and brought food and water to folks that were at the park and just asked anybody and everybody if they wanted some or in need of food. Just a deep, compassionate individual who puts her empathy in action on a weekend basis. And she had said that it would be super helpful if she could access more information through our city's website on how she might be able to make more of her services available in the community. That's just one individual, and I know that there's hundreds more in our community that would like to be able to provide those kind of coordinated supports, including when they provide that food and clothing outreach, to be able to inform the neighbors that they're working with or speaking to and have relationships with about where to go to access these warming centers.
Through the chair to the council, absolutely. In terms of coordination on the city's website, I will add too that COVID got in the way, but we were working on with one of our partner agencies and another organization in terms of mobile app and that type of aspect that individuals maybe have real-time updates, which is important because, like I say, many of these drop-ins, as much as we coordinate and ensure operating hours stay the same, there are often fluctuations. So that means of not only informing the individual, but those that may be assisting those individuals, that app will certainly provide some guidance.
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Okay, Chair.
Thank you. So we move, do we have a mover and seconder for this one? Nope. Moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by myself. And it's before you electronically shortly. Thank you. And that carries. Moving on to item 10.4, Seniors Advice Citizen Committee Report respecting proposed resolution regarding Hamilton Police Services Board and the Hamilton Police Services failure to provide adequate and effective police services in long-term care homes in the city of Hamilton. I do recognize that this is a report that has resolutions that speak to the Police Services Board specifically. So from a procedural perspective, I believe the only thing that this committee can do is actually just receive the report at this time. So any discussion? Oh, receive and refer to the Police Services Board. Thank you. Any discussion, colleagues? Councillor Jackson, go ahead.
Oh, I was happy to move it, Chair Nan.
Oh.
I'm just glad that you added that second component because they just didn't want it to be received. They want further, if I could, Chair Nan.
Yes, go ahead, please.
Thank you. As the mover, as you see with the resolution, our Seniors Advisory Committee that you and I have been honored to be appointed to by Council with 19 volunteers They've taken this matter seriously. Very concerned for the frail elderly that reside in many retirement homes and long-term care facilities. They've done their homework. They see that police have investigated only a certain number of the cases they feel should have been, the deaths that should have been investigated. And so they're asking the chief of police, hopefully through the police service board as well, to provide explanations why 88 deaths, in their opinion, and the homework they've done and research, why they were not adequately investigated. So I will move that. Thank you, Chair Nan.
Thank you. Happy to second it as your co-council appointee. It's before committee to receive and refer. Councillor Clark. Carries, thank you. Moving on to item 5, agreements with community housing providers to use access to housing. Report HSC 21041.
Chair Nan, stop, Chair Nan. How can I virtually touch him? Okay, I'm just kidding. Thank you.
Just for context for the public viewing that cannot see the entire squares that we see as participants, there is a very adorable dog in the company of Councillor Clark.
My apologies.
No worries. So moving and seconding on this important report, please. A mover, Councillor Jackson, seconded by Councillor Clark. Any discussion on the report? Seeing that, we'll move to electronic vote. Carries. Moving on to 10.6, City Veterans Committee 2022 budget submission. Elsie Bates are the next several items are all committee budgets. I wonder, it is item 10.6, 10.7, and 10.8 are all speaking to budget submissions by advisory committees that report to the standing committee. Are committee members okay with moving the batch? Okay, moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Jackson. That is the Veterans Committee. It is the Housing and Homelessness Advisory Committee and the LGBTQ Advisory.
And Councillor Nan, apologies through you. We also have 10.10, which is the budget submissions from seniors, if you want to add that to the bunch. So it would be
that one into the batch, yes.
10.6, 10.7, 10.8, and 10.10. Bear with me for a moment while I prepare the vote.
No problem. Councillor Marula, if you could. And that carries, thank you. So that brings us to item 9, LGBTQ Advisory Committee Citizen Committee Report respecting appointment of additional committee members. Colleagues, any discussion hanging over from the delegation? There was a possibility of having a policy review. However, there was also clarity that the municipal act stipulates that no new appointees can take place 10 months prior to a municipal, or 12 months prior to a municipal election. Committee members, what is your wish?
Move to receive, please.
Move to receive. Seconder? Councillor Jackson? Carries. Moving on to item 10.11, which is 2021 Ministry of Long-Term Care Funding Enhancements. HSC 21052 for Ward 6 and 13. May I please have a mover and seconder to put the report on the floor? Moved by Councillor Jackson, second by Councillor Marula. Any discussion on this report, colleagues? Councillor Jackson, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair Nan. And as this has been an added report with very, very good news, I think it's very important for public consumption to hear from our senior administrator, Holly Odiarty. Oh, by the way, one typo. Although Macassa Lodge was for many, many years up to the last ward boundary realignment in the wonderful Ward 6 community, it technically now is in Ward 7.
Ward 7.
So I'll leave that to the staff to correct the typo. And Wentworth, of course, is in 13. Anyways, this is fantastic news. If I'm reading the report correctly, approximately 1.5 million annual funding from thank you, finally, Premier Doug Ford, Minister Elliott of Health, Minister Rod Phillips of Long-Term Care, and our one government MPP for the Hamilton area, Donna Skelly, and her hard efforts and advocacy. If I'm reading this correctly, this will increase future-based funding, at least at this time, by 1.5 million annually to our 2 long-term care facilities owned by the municipality, which means that Holly, Karen Elcroft, and Wentworth Lodge, the administrator there, can hopefully hire up to 39 more FTE equivalents, nurses, PSWs, caretaking staff, whatever may be required. Through you, Chair Nan, with that opening, hopefully accurate interpretation. I'd like, though, the senior administrator to provide the details of our report, please.
I'm sorry, I muted myself and was talking. Go ahead, Director.
Through the chair, Holly O'Doherty, Senior Administrator, Long-Term Care for Macassa and Wentworth Lodges. Through to Councillor Jackson, thank you so much for that. Yes, wonderful, wonderful news for us here at Macassa and Wentworth, in addition to across the province. So we're very excited to be receiving these 2 pockets of money. And so they're quite specific in how we're allocating it. So the first group is for RNs, RPNs, and PSWs. And so each home has the ability to determine what nursing care that they require to enhance to help get us to 4 hours of care to the fiscal year of 2024-2025. And then the second pot of money is for allied health. And allied health can be a combination of dietitian, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, and there's additional opportunities for other people, recreationists, etc. And so we're really excited now. I want to provide some clarity around the FTEs. So throughout the pandemic, we enhanced our part-time staff to full-time hours with our pandemic monies that we've been receiving to enhance care to our residents, especially at times when our families were not able to come into our homes. And so that we were hoping to be able to keep all of those part-time hours that we increased to be able to be full-time hours and have these part-time employees now as full-time equivalents and being able to receive benefits. So this is a great news story, again, for our homes, but for long-term care across Ontario.
Thank you for that confirmation, Holly, and further detailed explanation. And of course, we're happy for all LTCs across the province, but don't ever underestimate, Chair Nan, what your committee and ultimately City Council has done in concert with our staff in terms of the lobbying and the advocacy for the municipally owned 2 long-term care homes in Hamilton, Wentworth Lodge, and Macassa Lodge to secure this type of wonderful, sustainable annual operational funding increase. Holly, supplementary to you, this 1.5 takes us to about the end of spring of next year, the way I read your report. Can I presume ongoing conversation and dialogue for that extended funding to 2025 you mentioned will continue with the ministries? Through you, Chair Nan, please.
Through the chair to Councillor Jackson, that is correct. We anticipate receiving funding for the 22, 23, 23, 24, and 24, 25 fiscal years through the Ministry of Long-Term Care. And this would be considered base funding that would be added each year so that we get to a goal of 4 hours of care per day per resident.
Fantastic, extraordinary news, Chair Nan. I'm not being melodramatic. I can't stress this enough. This is sustainable annual operating increased base funding to our 2 municipal homes to provide extra amount of hours and care to the roughly 470 residents, the frail elderly residents that call Macassa Lodge and Wentworth Lodge home. Great work, Holly, to you and your team. Chair Nan, to you and this committee and council. Very proud. And again, primarily to our local government MPP, Donna Skelly. I know she's always gone to bat for our 2 municipal homes and long-term care homes overall across the city. Thank you very much. Proud to move it on the committee's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And thank you, Holly, for your overview as well. Significant indeed. Did we have a chance to, oh, Councillor Clark, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Chair Nan. You know, we as a municipality frequently have this yin and yang tension with the provincial government and the federal government in terms of funding. In this case, there is a concerted effort in terms of advocating for the additional funding for the long-term care facility to ensure that we have the proper hours of service for each of those residents who are some of the most vulnerable people in our municipality. So I want to highlight 2 things. One, they came through for the residents, and this is a cumulative effect between now and 2025. And the second one, far too often, especially the last 2 governments, there would be these one-time funding announcements. And this is not this. This is not a one-time funding announcement. This is added to the base funding, which is incredibly helpful. So I agree with Councillor Jackson. Kudos to MPP Skelly for her efforts and to the government for coming through. This is something we should be celebrating and thanking them for.
Thank you both. Agreed. Moved and seconded, and now up for electronic vote. That carries unanimously. Move on to item 12, notices of motion. At which point I'll pass the chair over to Councillor Jackson.
Okay, Councillor, floor is yours.
Thank you. And I'll be leaving this as a notice of motion in respect of dialogue with my colleagues, as well as giving our various community partners an opportunity to review the motion as well. And so it will be on the docket for our next ACS in the new year of 2022.
Did you just want to read the heading of it?
Sure, I can do.
Public
Yep.
consumption, Councillor?
It's a comprehensive human rights-based health-focused housing solution for residents living encamped across Hamilton. If I could, through you, Chair, I can read the motion onto the public record and then leave it
Let's
at
do that and then keep it as a notice.
Sure. Whereas the reality of unhoused residents living in encampments is a persistent reality across the city of Hamilton, and whereas these encampments have become increasingly visible throughout the pandemic, and whereas the number of unhoused residents who've been living encamped in Hamilton ranges between 80 to 140 people, whereas encampments will persist until the city of Hamilton develops and implements a strategy to eliminate homelessness that addresses the unique health needs experienced by those who are encamped, and whereas the city's housing and homelessness strategy is rooted in a solution-focused, person-centered approach and recognizes that best practices for solutions are the result of the direct participation of those with lived experiences of being unhoused. And whereas the largest gap in addressing the unique needs of many of those residents who have no other option than to live encamped rests in the lack of comprehensive, coordinated housing and health-based resources, which is having a disproportionate impact on unhoused Indigenous people, those unhoused residents living with disabilities, and those unhoused residents from other equity-seeking groups that continue to face cultural, structural, and systemic barriers in accessing appropriate supportive housing. And whereas an enforcement-led response to the existence of encampments on city property does not solve homelessness nor result in healing, therefore be it resolved that the city staff be directed to host solution-focused planning sessions made up of representatives from the health sector, housing service providers, organizations that provide frontline support to unhoused, people with lived experiences of being unhoused and living in encampments, and other community stakeholders be convened to identify comprehensive, human rights-based, health-focused housing solutions to directly address the needs of those 80 to 140 unhoused residents living in encampments in Hamilton. B, that any costs associated in hosting and facilitating these planning sessions be covered through the existing housing services budget, and C, that staff report back these recommendations of the planning sessions for council's consideration to the Emergency Community Services Committee.
Perfect, Councillor. Chair's back to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other notices of motion? Seeing none, we'll move to item 14. Members of committee, do you wish to move in closed session to discuss item 14.1?
I'm happy to move it in open session, maintaining the confidentiality of it if the other councillors are comfortable with it.
I see
I concur.
visual confirmation. Okay, so no need to go in camera, in which case Councillor Clark is the mover, seconder. Councillor Jackson, to approve the following recommendation, corresponding to item 14.1, that A, the direction provided to staff in the direction provided to staff in the closed session report respecting report HSC 21008A, Housing Focused Street Outreach Team and Staffing be approved, and B, that this report respecting the Housing Focused Street Outreach Team staffing remain confidential. We'll require an electronic vote, so please indicate now. Councillor Jackson is coming in. There it is. And that carries unanimously. Colleagues, prior to us moving to adjournment, if I could just take a moment to say thank you. It's been an absolute honor and privilege to serve as your chair for the year of 2021 for this Emergency Community Services Committee. I also want to say thank you to all the staff teams and divisions that make up the standing committee, including Healthy and Safe Communities, Hamilton Paramedics, and Hamilton Fire. I also want to thank our legislative clerks team that have, provided unbelievable amount of support that has helped facilitate my ability to chair this committee for the year. It's been, I said, an honor and a privilege. It's been tremendous to witness a little bit more behind the scenes how much our city staff do as it relates to the work of this committee. And I am often in awe and admiration and absolute gratitude for our staff on behalf of our residents. Thank you, committee members. And we'll move to adjourn. Oh, no, we won't.
Given that you did such a great job, Chair Nan, I'm more than happy to yield the chair next year back to you. And I'm seeing no.
No.
Thank you very much for your work. Happy to move adjournment.
Okay. Oh, General Manager Mader.
Can I just make one very quick statement? I just wanted to say thank you to Chair Nan and to the entire committee for your support. It has been a particularly long meeting today and I also really appreciated the ongoing support that you've given to all of the divisions here, particularly through the housing services and the amount of work and energy that went into today's information and that. And I really appreciate the great feedback and the great support. And I just wanted to say thank you.
Yay. Okay, so we are at adjournment. Moved by Councillor Clark, second by Councillor Marula. And we've got a visual confirmation from Councillor Jackson.
And I'll do my thank yous of the chair at council as I traditionally do.
Aw, thanks. He voted by showing his thumb.
Have a great evening, everybody.
Have a great
Thank
evening,
you.
everyone. Thank you, everyone.